Hey folks, Justin Bishop here. I just want to let you know about an upcoming live event with Cinema Shock. Our monthly cult class series is coming back to Coffee Underground in Greenville, South Carolina on Tuesday, August the 20th. This time we're doing a kind of back-to-school edition of Cult Class, and we are showing the classic Alan Arkush film, Rock and Roll High School. We are very excited about it. We're teaming up once again with our friends at Gut Punch Cinema. We're going to be screening this movie live there at Coffee Underground with an introduction by me, Gary, and Todd. So come on out. Tickets are $12 at the door, but $10 if you buy them in advance. To get your tickets, just go to cinemashock.net, click on events. It should be the very first thing you see there, and we hope to see you there.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Let's go.
Hit it, Gary.
Do your thing, Gary.
Is it me? Yeah. Oh, yeah. The opening, like we've always done. Like, what am I hitting?
Oh,
We're 117 episodes in. This is episode 117. You should know that by now. Not only should you know that now, you should have it memorized by now. Although we did recently switch up the intro a little bit, so
Only to make it easier. And
Yeah, that's
I'm still
true.
gonna read it as I say it.
Yeah.
Well, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock. This is the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. This is the last podcast series you'll ever need about David Lynch. And I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horde.
hey, I'm co-host Justin Bishop.
and I am not an animal. I am writer comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 3 of our series titled David Lynch, Absurd. Oh, fuck! I had one goddamn word to get. Fuck!
That's what editing's for.
Yep.
We're not
Hey.
editing that, Gary. We're leaving it in.
Yeah, you guys.
We might as well. Yeah.
God damn it. David Lynch, Absurd Encounters.
Episode 3. Did you say episode 3?
It is. Yes, I did say
This is
episode,
episode 3. Yeah, and Todd, despite what you might say,
Mhm.
I think you are an animal.
3. Only between the sheets, buddy.
Oh, wow.
Writer comedian in the streets.
Elephant man in the sheets.
Elephant man.
He's only an animal in the sheets because he always leaves fleas in the bed.
That reminds me. I gotta make a
hate-
I gotta make a barber's appointment. I gotta get this beard trimmed down. God
hate
damn.
myself.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. Before we get into this, we want to do what we're going to do at the beginning of every episode. As long as we've got one to announce, we want to thank our Fourth Wall supporters. We got a new supporter this week by the name of Nate Izod. Hope I'm pronouncing that
Nate.
correctly. But Nate, thank you for joining. He joined at the Be Excellent tier. The Be Excellent tier is our highest tier.
Wow.
Where you will get, you get video content on that one, which is pretty cool. You get a bigger discount on Cinema Shock merch. We've got a lot of cool stuff, new shirts, new hats. We got a tie-dye shirt with our logo embroidered on it. We've
I
got,
didn't realize we had a tie-dye shirt.
yeah, it's pretty cool. It's got the logo
Nice.
like embroidered on the like pocket area
Oh,
right here. It's
cool.
really cool. It's like a black and gray and white tie-dye.
Oh,
We got new
nice.
hats, trucker hats. We've got like 3 different types of trucker hats. If you guys want dad hats or something like that, though, I don't wear dad hats because they look dumb on my head. But if you like a dad hat and you want it, let us know. I'll make dad hats. We'll do it.
What's a dad hat?
It's like that flatter profile hat that all the like younger kids are wearing these days. It looks
Like a flat cap?
no, it's a dad hat. It's just a dad hat, Todd. Just
Oh.
Google it. You'll
I'll
know
go-
what it
yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah.
You'll know what it
Okay.
is once you see it. But they look dumb on my head because of this beard, I think. It makes my head look out of proportion. Like the top of it looks too small.
Like you
Once I
belong
got
in a David Lynch movie.
Yeah. But yeah, we got t-shirts. So we got new t-shirts with our catchphrases on them. May the Wings of Liberty Never Lose a Feather, all that stuff. We got new versions of those, all kinds of the new logo on shirts. We got all kinds of shit. But you do get discounts if you join Fourth Wall. As I said, Nate, who joined Be Excellent, he's getting, I think, 15% off of everything in the store. If you join at the lower tiers, you can get 10% off. And you also get extended episodes that has Somebody Needs a Nap, which is where we read a bunch of reviews off the internet that Gary has found. The dumber, the better. And we read and react to those. And then, of course, Further Viewing, which is one of my favorite segments where we give you recommendations on other movies to pair with. In the case of today, something like The Elephant Man. We talked about Eraserhead last week and gave a couple of fun recommendations. Todd gave one of the best Further Viewing recommendations he's ever given. At least the one that makes the most sense compared to the other ones that he's given.
We'll help you out this time, because if you're not ready to unalive yourself by the end of Elephant Man, then we can help get you the rest of the way there with our Further Viewing this week.
With our recommendations. But yeah, so if you want to know what movies we would recommend or what we would pair with The Elephant Man, you can join our Fourth Wall. Cinema Shock Plus actually is what I'm going to start calling it. Cinema Shock Plus. You know, everybody's doing the plus thing. AMC Plus, Disney Plus. It's just a thing. So you can go to cinemashock.net/plus. Make it easy for you and join there. You get the extended episode. You get the episode 2 days early as well. We're going to have some other content down the line as well. We won't push it this hard forever and ever and ever.
I was going to say, should we create, like, as for the part of the tier, they don't have to listen to us talk about it for like an hour?
I cut this shit. I cut this shit right here out of the Fourth Wall members extended episode because they've already joined. They don't need to be sold.
I was listening to it, editing the last one, and I was like, okay, we talked about this a long time.
Yeah, but if you're a member on Fourth Wall, I did cut that out, so you didn't have to listen to it. Because why do I need to sell you on something you've already purchased, right? We just want to thank you. That's all. Thank you for joining. Yeah. Thank you, Nate, for joining.
Thank you, Nate.
Nate, huge fan of your polos.
Yes,
they're great. They are great. Really good stuff. You can get them at JCPenney, I believe. Does JCPenney still exist?
Thank you for this. I don't know. But we do appreciate you, Nate. Thank you.
Yeah, we really do. We appreciate everyone who's joined Cinema Shock Plus so far. Everyone, if you are an active member, as long as you're an active member, you will also be listed as an associate producer in the show notes on every episode for as long as your membership goes. So if you are, because we do consider you an associate producer because you are helping us pay for the production costs. We're not really making any money off of this. This is kind of paying for the podcast hosting, the website hosting, the books and things, all this other shit that we have to get. Like that's what your money's going towards. So you are a producer on the show as long as you're helping support us. So thank you again. Also, if you need a little extra further convincing, we do have an annual membership available where you can pay for the whole year at once. I'm not going to do that forever. I'm just going to do that. Offer that for the first few months since the launch, but you get 10% off if you purchase the whole year at once. So it's a pretty good deal, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll stop trying to sell shit for now, and instead we'll get on with the episode. But thank you, Nate. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Nate.
Yeah.
Well, hello. And what?
All right. So at the end of our last episode, David Lynch's debut film, Eraserhead, had become a midnight movie sensation. Now, it didn't exactly thrust him into the spotlight as an Hollywood A-lister, but it did turn a few heads. And its success would lead to Lynch being courted by one of Hollywood's biggest names, a guy known for creating some of the most successful comedies of the 1970s, Mel Brooks. We all know Mel Brooks. We all love Mel Brooks, right?
Yes.
And the film that Brooks pursued Lynch for was not a comedy, not the kind of movie he was known for, nor was it a surreal work of nightmarish fiction as Eraserhead had been, but instead it was the true story of a man with severe physical deformities set in the world of Victorian England. And as odd as that combination of pieces seems, it was with this film that Hollywood would truly take note of David Lynch's talent. And the movie we are talking about is, of course, Lynch's 1982 film, The Elephant Man.
Are you in any pain? Are your parents still alive?
Life is full of surprises.
People are frightened by what they don't understand. Well, today we'll be discussing this film in great detail. So if you haven't seen it, heed my spoiler warning.
I gotta tell you, this one's gonna be a short episode because it turns out the way this all went down is Mel Brooks doesn't read or watch anything that he has anything to do with. He was like, somebody mentioned David Lynch, and he was just like, David, loved your Eraserhead. It was so great. The way it just took the pencil shavings and everything. It was just perfect. I love it. You just say it was so great on the pencil. Just erased it right off. It was funny. I got a knee slapper for you. It's about this guy with a really big trunk. And, well, we'll get to it. There's lots of jokes to do with that.
Oh, God.
Oh, man. So before we get to the story of the Elephant Man, because Gary's lying and that is not the real story. I don't know if you caught on to that, but that was an embellishment on the case of Gary Horn. But before we do get into the real story of the Elephant Man, first we need to briefly talk about Ronnie Rocket, which was film that...
Didn't you used to work at Ronnie Rocket?
Oh, that was Johnny Rocket. That's his brother.
Okay. All right. Johnny and Ronnie Rocket.
Yeah, Johnny and they're twins.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
This is starting to feel like a Mel Brooks episode.
We came in here with all kinds of weird energy, fellas.
Yeah, for real. Well, Ronnie Rocket, we briefly mentioned it last episode, but it was the film that Lynch had originally intended to make as his follow-up to Eraserhead.
It sounds like you're saying Johnny Rockets, but like Scooby-Doo. Ronnie Rocket.
Ooh, ruh-roh, Raggy.
Oh man, you guys made me lose my place.
I couldn't unhear that.
So when a studio executive asked Lynch what his new script was about, Lynch described it as, this is a direct quote from Lynch. Well, it's about this 3-foot man with a red pompadour who runs on alternating mains electricity. Or, as Lynch explained to Chris Rodley in the book Lynch on Lynch, it's about, quote, the absurd mystery of the strange forces of existence.
I gotta say, sounds like a really great time at the movies.
That's what all of these movies are about.
Yeah, absolutely.
The absurd mystery of the strange forces of existence. That's what we should have called this series. Well, I mean, we call it Absurd Encounter, so it's sort of a,
We're close.
Yeah, a shorter version of that. Right.
Yeah.
Well, that studio executive, unsurprisingly, passed on the project, as would all of the others. According to Lynch, when he explained what the movie was, he said it's about a 3-foot guy with a pompadour who runs on electricity. The guy just said, "Get out of my office." That was the end of the meeting. And I think that was the only like that was as far as he ever got in a meeting. Everyone else just turned him down before it even got that far. He never even, and I don't think he even really got into the office of any other studio.
When I first read that, I read it as a guy with a 3-foot pompadour. So I was waiting on that.
Yeah.
I was like,
a normal sized guy with a really tall, like Eraserhead. But
yeah, exactly. I was like, come up with something new, Lynch. You can do it.
Well, even after Eraserhead's midnight movie success, Lynch was still struggling to make ends meet in his personal life. He wasn't making billions of dollars off of Eraserhead at this point, and he was in no position to really jump right into another project because he had bills to pay. He had kids to feed. So his father, who had recently moved to California, he'd bought this house, this old fixer-upper, and in the months following the completion of Eraserhead, Lynch and his father began to renovate the house with the plans to sell it once that renovation was complete, and then the money made from its sale would be given to Lynch and Mary Fisk, his wife, as a wedding gift. So it was in this house that most of Ronnie Rocket's script was written. So Lynch would work on the house during the day, and then he'd sit down at night with the goal of cranking out about 10 pages of the script.
I mean, with David Lynch working on a lot of artwork, is this house considered one of his pieces of art?
I mean, he would probably consider it that way. He did build a lot. He talks about building sheds a lot during this period.
Really?
Where he would just his landlord had a lot of scrap wood. His landlord was like a millionaire, but also a hoarder and a cheapskate. And he would just save wood. And David Lynch would ask him if he could use the wood, and he would just build sheds. He was really into sheds at this time.
This was that Odd Job thing he did.
I've never felt more connected to David Lynch than after that little piece of info.
This gentleman is what we refer to these days as neurodivergent, I believe. I mean, he hyper focuses on things like that,
But good for him for being able to spread things around to still focus on. I wish I had this dedication.
You should do that when you're editing the podcast.
No, I know.
Sit down and edit 10 minutes. Edit 10 minutes tomorrow, instead of waiting till the night before and then getting all stressed about it.
I wanted to point out here, how weird to be in David Lynch's head, because he talks about this Roddy Rocket idea just being stuck in his head, like it was just all there instantly, and he's like, it just had it, and so I had to just each day write 10 pages until I got it all out. It took about a month or whatever.
Yeah.
Also, what a nice dad he has. This guy has been supportive since before Eraserhead and supportive about everything David Lynch is doing, and now is helping him build a house so he can sell it for a wedding present.
Yeah, his parents were both incredibly supportive, even though they didn't really understand his art and what he was doing. Which is, I think that's great though. I think that's a good parent. Like, support your children, even if you don't understand what they're doing, even if they're artistic and you don't understand their art, you don't get their art, you don't understand how their brain works, but you want them to thrive. I think that's really cool. Honestly,
Pat and Walt Davis.
We've broken Todd.
Is it so hard? Is that so hard?
My parents were kind of that way, except they were more just like, I don't care what you do.
Now, in David Lynch fan circles, Ronnie Rocket is kind of a thing of legend. It's one of Lynch's great unrealized projects, and for years, Lynch tried in vain to get this script made, returning to it over and over again in between various projects over the years, but he eventually gave up on it sometime in the 90s, around after Twin Peaks kind of became popular. He just kind of like realized this is never, ever going to get made. But if one were to read the script for Ronnie Rocket, which you can very easily find online, they would see a lot of elements that would pop up in later Lynch films. So the story of Ronnie Rocket is set in this sort of 1950s style, but undetermined era in the soot-covered city filled with factories where the air crackles with electricity. Sounds a little bit like the city from Eraserhead, but maybe a little bit more ambitious, right?
Is this potentially a Cinema Shock read-through event?
Oh, I don't know. It depends on how many. I mean,
let's leave that to the listeners. Hey,
or the Cinema Shock Plus supporters.
That's true. Yeah,
maybe the supporters, we sit down and we actually read the whole script.
Read through Ronnie Rocket.
That'll be fun.
Can I play Ronnie? I'll
I'll
put on a red pompadour.
Listen, you're going to have to audition like everybody else, Justin.
I'll be the narrator.
Okay. That tracks.
I'll read all the stage direction on it.
Okay.
I say we cast Jack Nance.
Well, that's going to be tough. Unless you got a Ouija board or a medium of some sort.
Even more reason to support Cinema Shock Plus.
So that we can hire a medium and bring Jack Nance's spirit back.
So what did you guys do with your crowdfunding money? Well, turns out.
So anyway, the plot to Ronnie Rocket has two through lines. It's much more ambitious than Eraserhead. It's got two through lines that it follows. One is about a detective on a strange, somewhat ambiguous case, which of course has shades of Twin Peaks, while the other concerns the creation of the title character, Ronnie Rocket, the 3-foot man that Lynch alluded to in his description to that studio executive. So Ronnie, in the script, he was fabricated by scientists or resurrected by scientists and runs on electricity, and he's forced to plug himself in every so often to recharge. Electricity, as you can imagine, is a pretty major motif in the script. And as I pointed out in our Eraserhead episode, electricity is kind of a recurring theme throughout Lynch's filmography. And this film, the script for Ronnie Rocket also charts Ronnie's rise to rock stardom, with live musical performance being another recurring motif in Lynch's work. And the film's opening sequence features a stage enclosed by a heavy curtain, which is another recurring Lynch image. I mean, we saw it already in Eraserhead. And then this curtain opens to reveal a wall of fire, which is a repeated image that we're going to see in Wild at Heart. So all this stuff is kind of like, you're going to see this stuff a lot throughout David Lynch's filmography, and all of it is kind of like in this script, in this Ronnie Rocket script. It's really kind of, which is, I think, why it becomes such a fascinating project for so many David Lynch fans. First of all, it never happened, but it feels so Lynchian.
It made me think of that Universal classic monster movie, Man-Made Monster, where
Not seen that one.
Lon Chaney Jr. plays Dynamo Dan the Electric Man. I wonder if there was maybe a little osmosis and maybe.
It's possible. I also get like shades
cool.
of
Cool.
I get shades of Frankenstein. I mean, with the creation of Ronnie, because he it runs on electricity and he's created by a scientist. Like, it definitely feels Frankenstein like in some way.
Yeah, for sure.
So the city where this story is set is under the thumb of a tyrant who commands an army of donut men. I don't know what donut men are. That's how Lynch describes them in the script. They're donut men.
Police officers.
Well, I guess so, but he just calls them donut men, I guess, because they like donuts. I don't know.
Yeah, that tracks.
But these donut men have been tailing the detective. And then there's a lot of talk about closed circuits and scenes of characters stabbing themselves with knitting needles in order to maintain a constant state of rejuvenating pain. It's really weird. It's very strange. But when you study it, knowing the images and themes that would show up in Lynch's later work, Ronnie Rocket does kind of feel like the missing link between the surreality of Eraserhead and the more realistic setting of Blue Velvet's kind of 50s style suburbia. Blue Velvet's not set in the 50s, it's set in present day, but when we watch it, you'll see it feels very 50s, and that's on purpose, and a lot of his work does.
Is it like retrofuturism, like Fallout or something?
No, it's just a vibe.
Oh, okay.
There's just a vibe to it that feels very 50s. You'll know when you see it.
Cool.
So I'm sure you can understand by my very brief description of the script why studios were not really interested in Ronnie Rocket. It was just too weird, too strange, and unlike Eraserhead, would cost far too much to produce for something this esoteric. So Ronnie Rocket was a lost cause. It just wasn't happening. But Lynch wasn't going to let that stop him from making movies. But the experience with Ronnie Rocket made him realize that if he wanted to pursue filmmaking, and he wanted this to be like a career, what he needed to do was prove himself as a quote-unquote regular filmmaker. So he turned to a young producer by the name of Stuart Cornfeld for help. Now, longtime listeners of the show may recognize the name of Stuart Cornfeld. Although he would primarily be associated with comedies for much of his career, another one of his early producing credits was on David Cronenberg's The Fly. We talked about it on that episode, and he was largely responsible for getting Cronenberg hired for that gig. Cornfeld would go on to be an incredibly successful producer, later forming a production company with Ben Stiller. He also was reportedly the inspiration for the Les Grossman character. That's the guy that Tom Cruise plays in Tropic Thunder. But at the time of The Elephant Man, he was a relative unknown.
So this is where we start our drinking game, where if one of us does a Les Grossman quote, you take a shot for the rest of the episode.
I have a feeling that means that Todd's going to just start quoting Tropic Thunder a lot throughout this episode.
We'll see.
Also, don't have any alcohol nearby, so I will take a shot of water and stay hydrated.
Hey.
I honestly don't remember a Lex Grossman quote, but I did remember another time we've mentioned Stuart Cornfeld in this show besides the Fly episode.
Oh yeah, tell me,
Really?
you tell.
It was in Darkman. He cameoed as a dock worker during the movie.
Oh,
That's
wow.
right. I forgot about that. You're right. Now,
Damn.
was he involved in Darkman at all, and like behind the scenes, or was he just like friends with Sam Raimi? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it was just like a friendly thing. Like
Yeah,
he
they were
did
just
it, 'cause
buddies.
I don't remember reading anything about him doing anything on the movie.
Yeah, and I looked over all of his like credits when I was working on this episode, and I don't remember Darkman. I felt like that would have stood out to me because we've covered it on the show. But yeah, I do remember that towards the beginning of the movie, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like when the warehouse fire and all that stuff. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, Stuart Cornfeld. How about that?
That's
Well,
it. That's our show.
Good night, everybody.
Well, like Lynch, Cornfeld had attended the AFI Conservatory. Though he and Lynch, they didn't attend together. They were kind of like, it was very close to the same time, but they weren't there together. They weren't like classmates. Cornfeld was actually part of AFI's producer program, and one of his classmates at the school was actress Anne Bancroft. Anne Bancroft, she was already a well-established actor at that point. She was in her 40s at the time. She'd been acting for like 2 decades. Just a few years earlier, she had appeared in arguably her most iconic role as Mrs. Robinson in The Graduate. Well, she was attending AFI's filmmaking program, where she was working on her debut as a writer-director, a film called Fatso that she would co-star in alongside Dom DeLuise. So she was going to AFI to become a director, basically to learn how to be a director. And she befriended Cornfeld and hired him to be a producer on the film, on Fatso. And she also introduced Cornfeld to another of her producers, which was her husband, Mel Brooks. After Fatso, Brooks hired Cornfeld as his producer on High Anxiety and History of the World Part 1. So they became kind of producing partners. He was sort of Mel Brooks' like protege for a while.
So I'm going to need you to take a step back and literally fuck your own face.
Oh, he's doing the thing.
Yep. Yeah,
That's
that's
the
the
thing.
first one.
I got to rewatch that movie. It's
Such a good movie.
So Cornfeld had seen Eraserhead during its first midnight screening at the New Art. He was somebody recommended it to him, And he went to the very first screening with like 20 other people, he said, and he was blown away by it. Like he talks about Eraserhead like it was a life-altering experience. So he was eager to work with the guy who made it. And he cold called David Lynch's house, which is something that he never did, but he just really felt the need to get in touch with David Lynch and work with him. So he called David Lynch's house, left a message with David Lynch's wife, Mary, and she gave him she's like, hey, this guy called, the Stuart Kornfeld guy called. And David Lynch just really liked the sound of his name, kept repeating it over and over, just going like walking around the house going, Kornfeld, Stuart Kornfeld, like just being a weird little charming David Lynch guy. But in Lynch's brain, for some reason, like that was enough reason for him to take a meeting with Kornfeld.
And that's all you need to know about David Lynch. But yeah, he works so much off intuition, it feels like, you know, and this is like when he's making movies, obviously, but this feels like an example of that. Like he just felt like something was drawing him towards this guy. No, it 100% does. And to hear him talk about Stuart Kornfeld, it sounds like, I mean, he just already knew we're going to be buddies. And they were like friends for a while. And I mean, even before the next part of this, in one interview I was reading with him, he talks about how great they got along. And then he had been trying to raise money for Ronnie Rocket, and it wasn't working out. He had like zero success, he said. And so then called Kornfeld, was like, hey, do you think you can help me with this? And Kornfeld's like, sure. And so they tried. It said, even together, though, that still wasn't happening. So basically what happened then is eventually Lynch, you know, he's doing these odd jobs and everything, but he needs money like everybody else and needs to get a job doing something. And he decides, okay, maybe I need to consider doing someone else's script. It's not happening for me this way. So he also at that point gets to call up Kornfeld and say, do you happen to know of any other scripts that I could just direct? And Stuart says, as a matter of fact, I've got 4 in mind. And so they go and meet up at a place. It was called Nibbler's.
Yeah, another diner, coffee shop, you know.
Nice.
And to get some lunch and, of course, as you might guess, some coffee. So Lynch is pretty anxious at this point. So he says he's trying to get something going. So he says, okay, before we even order, I just got to know, what do you have? Tell me about these ideas. He says Stuart leads with, okay, well, the first script I've got is called The Elephant Man. And for whatever reason, Lynch says, his exact words, instantly a small bomb went off in my head. That was it. That's what I wanted to do. I never even heard the other 3 ideas.
And that's another thing I'm talking about, like that intuition, like there's something just about the name, The Elephant Man, like spoke to him enough to where like he didn't even want to know the names of the other scripts. He's like, that's it, The Elephant Man. I got to do that. He didn't know what it was about. He didn't know who John Merrick was. Like he had no idea what the script was even about. It was just a title that spoke to him. Isn't that wild? That he just like works off of like intuition like that.
Yeah, because I wonder if he had it described to him first, if he would have been interested. Now he might have been based on Merrick.
Yeah.
But like the setting, all of that, like that just seems like, is that what he would have picked? It's so weird.
Yeah. It seems strange, but he went based just off of the title.
I'd like to think that one of the other scripts was Any Which Way You Can.
You think so? With the monkey?
Yeah. Eastwood and the monkey.
It's an orangutan.
Mm-hmm.
It is, which is an ape. Sorry, not a monkey. I apologize. I apologize to all of our ape enthusiasts.
And Clint Eastwood fans.
And Clint Eastwood fans. And the intersection of the two. So The Elephant Man begins a sort of strange part of Lynch's career where after making this like deeply personal, deeply specific film with Eraserhead, a film that could have only been produced by the mind of David Lynch. Now he's about to embark on the first of 2 films that did not originate with him. And they're not the last 2 to be done this way, but the first 2 that somebody else was working on this before he came along, basically. You know, it felt for a minute during his career as if Lynch was willingly giving himself up to mainstream Hollywood. But in reality, like both The Elephant Man and Dune, which is the other one that we'll talk about on our next episode, they have a lot of Lynchian elements to them, which we'll get into. But as author Ian Nathan put it in David Lynch, A Retrospective, which is, again, one of our sources on this series, these 2 movies, he said, quote, paint instructive pictures of an artist learning the hard way exactly who he was. And I think that's something that's a good quote to keep in mind, not just with this episode, but when we talk about Dune as well, because there is obviously things go very differently for this movie than they do on that one. But The Elephant Man, the script that he was given, it tells the true story of Joseph Merrick, who's often erroneously referred to as John, including in the film. Merrick was an Englishman born in about 1862 who suffered from several medical conditions that led to him becoming severely deformed. As for what those medical conditions are, there's still debate behind that. It's likely a combination of several things. Proteus disease, I think, is one of them, but I think he may have had a couple of other things going on. But scientists have never been able to really pinpoint exactly what was going on with him. But Merrick joined a freak show, a circus sideshow, in order to escape the cruel conditions of the workhouses, and he was exhibited as the Elephant Man. Don't know why they called him the Elephant Man. It doesn't really look elephant-like, but that's what they were exhibiting him as.
There was due to some protrusion in his face, but also they said legitimately he was told when he was a kid, his mother was scared or something by an elephant when he was young. That was a legitimate thing that happened.
Interesting. So that's why we get that opening scene.
Yeah. So supposedly that was something that was his family just kept around when he was a kid.
I think also because he was born normal. His condition started to develop in childhood. So he was born looking perfectly healthy. And then I think that the first way that his condition began to manifest itself was in kind of scaly areas of skin. Yeah. So I could see that as being an elephant. The elephant has that hard, tough, gray skin. So I wondered if that had something to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's some combination of all these things. The whole story about him as a kid with his mom being there, but then she ends up passing away from pneumonia.
Yeah.
And then his dad remarries and wants nothing to do. If you're hoping that the real story was happier, it's not.
It's not.
Yeah.
It is not. It's a tragedy. But he was exhibited at this freak show as the Elephant Man until a man named Dr. Frederick Treves rescued him, bringing him back to live at the London hospital. And it was Treves's memoir, which is called The Elephant Man and Other Reminiscences.
You probably got it.
Subscribe.
But it was Treves' memoir that served as the primary basis for the script, which was written by Christopher DeVore and Eric Bergman. So when their 200-page script got into the hands of a young producer by the name of Jonathan Sanger, who was another protege of Mel Brooks, Sanger saw the potential in the story and optioned the screenplay. I think actually Sanger, I was watching an interview with him earlier today, and he said that he was given the script by his babysitter, his kid's babysitter, not his.
Oh, okay. All right.
Wow.
He had two young children, and their babysitter was the girlfriend of one of the writers. I don't know which one, but she was like, "Hey, can you read the script?" And he's like, "Well, he was not jaded enough as a young producer. He had never actually produced anything yet. This was his first producing credit. He was not jaded enough at the time to be like, everybody's got a fucking script in Hollywood. Right. No, I don't want to read your boyfriend's script." But he did. He read the script, and it was huge. 200 pages is a big script, but he read it and he thought it was really good. He saw the potential in the story, so he actually optioned the screenplay. And then when he let Stuart Cornfeld, his friend Stuart Cornfeld, read it, Cornfeld knew of the perfect director for the project. So
who was it?
Oh, it's David Lynch.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, that tracks with what everything else we're talking about.
Okay.
So after David Lynch got past the title and actually read the script, he did really love it. And in a meeting with Sanger and Cornfeld, he talked about how he envisioned the film, further cementing their desire to bring him on as the director. So with Lynch in mind to helm the film, Sanger and Cornfeld started meeting with studios, but they couldn't get anyone with enough clout to greenlight it. They couldn't get that high up in the studio hierarchy to somebody who could actually say, "Yeah, let's make this movie." They couldn't get in the door. These guys were nobodies. Nobody knew their name. Nobody. Yeah. And everyone read the script and they're like, this is kind of like a movie about a guy who's a monster. Nobody's going to want to see this. So nobody was really interested. Then Mel Brooks stepped in. Sanger got the script to Brooks, who read it and was fascinated by it. He really liked it. And Brooks had just founded a new production company called Brooks Films as a way to make non-Mel Brooks movies is what he saw. Movies that weren't comedies, although Brooks Films did later do some of his actual movies, like his movies that he directed. But at the time, it was formed as a company to do non-comedic movies. And this film's why Fatso was the first one that they would produce.
Just so it's in here, we don't get angry letters. I don't know if people still write letters, but I did see a couple of interviews where Lynch talks about, he actually credits Anne Bancroft a few times, that it was actually getting it to her that she read it and loved it too, and that she ended up making Mel read it.
Yeah, there's a couple of conflicting stories depending on who you're listening to. And again, this happened 40 some odd years ago at this point, 45 years ago. And so there are some conflicting stories. But yes, I read that as well, that Anne Bancroft, that I think Sanger gave it, or Kornfeld may have given it to Anne Bancroft, and then she gave it to Mel Brooks. But then other stories, they make it sound like they gave it to Mel directly. But either way, Kornfeld and Sanger both worked for Mel Brooks as well.
Yeah.
So
you think they have access. And either way, it got to Mel Brooks. He read it and he was in. And again, so funny how David Lynch describes these things, but he'll say, this began a journey for Stewart, me, the two writers, and Jonathan Sanger. I just love how he talks.
I do too. He's so quotable. Like he's so charming and like feels so just like, I don't know. There's this like G golly Willikers, you know.
It is. And it sounds like that the one interview I was watching, it sounded like it was the start of like that Stephen King movie Stand By Me.
Yeah.
You guys want to do a movie about a dead body?
Technically not wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes the real elephant man is the friends you make along the way. But anyway, they'd gone to like 5 studios at this point and they'd been shot down. But here's Mel Brooks.
Yeah. So The Elephant Man, of course, this script was about as far from what you would think of as a Mel Brooks movie as you could get. And Brooks would later insist on his own producing title being removed from the film. He did the same thing in The Fly so that audiences would not be misled into thinking that it was like some kind of comedy. Because can you imagine walking into this movie thinking you were about to get like Young Frankenstein?
Yeah.
Like that would be traumatizing, honestly. Yeah.
But
where are the
imagine
jokes?
Yeah, I was gonna say, imagine you spend a good portion of if you're with friends, you spend a good portion of the film going, no, it's gonna get funny. Like,
or you start laughing because you think you're supposed to.
I was literally just picturing like the first time he talks or something, and everybody's just like dying laughing. Oh no, this is not the right reaction.
But yeah, I mean, so I admire Mel Brooks for that, because this wasn't like a vanity thing. He would rather the movie be able to speak for itself than for people to go in with preconceived notions for what they thought the movie was going to be. So Mel Brooks puts the project into motion with Sanger as a producer and Kornfeld as an executive producer. He had his wife, Anne Bancroft, was taking a pivotal supporting role of stage actress Madge Kendall.
And Mel loves the script, and according to David Lynch, he says to his team, okay, Stewart, you're in. The 2 writers are in. Jonathan is in. Who is David Lynch? And they say, oh, he's a filmmaker and he made this film called Eraserhead. And according to Lynch, Mel says, well, I've never heard of it, so I need to see it. So the guy, David Lynch, when he tells the story, says the guys let him know, okay, it's coming together. He just wants to see Eraserhead first. And Lynch says he tells them, okay, well, it was nice knowing you guys.
I like that he's self-aware enough to know how weird he is, though, you know, and he knows Eraserhead's weird. So they did set up a screening of Eraserhead on the 20th Century Fox lot, and as Brooks sat inside watching, Lynch he didn't go in with him. He's like outside of the screening room, pacing the floor. I think it was just Mel Brooks and Jonathan Sanger in the room. So and Sanger was even like, as he's watching the movie, he's thinking like, man, Eraserhead, the second time you see it, is the longest movie of all time. Because he's like, he just is worried about, he's like, Mel Brooks is going to think I'm fucking crazy. He's going to be like, why did you bring me here? Like, what are we doing? What is this? You know? So David Lynch is pacing. He thinks he's just going to be fired. He's like, this is not going to go my way. And then at the end of the movie, this is sort of a legendary story, but David Lynch has told it 100 times. Everyone involved in the movie has told it 100 times. But the movie ends, the doors burst open. Mel Brooks comes walking out. He ran straight to David Lynch and he embraced him in a big bear hug. And he goes, I love you. You're a madman. You're in. So when you think about that, I have to wonder, like, what was it about Eraserhead? When Mel Brooks watched Eraserhead, he's already read the script to The Elephant Man. Then he watches Eraserhead, and something about Eraserhead made him think that this guy, David Lynch, was the right man for this very straightforward story. So, like, what is it about David Lynch's, about Eraserhead specifically, because that's all he had to work off of, that made Mel Brooks think this is the guy? This is the guy for the job. I got to thinking about that, like, as I was watching this and as I was researching it. So my answer for that is, I think, first of all, you've got this one movie, the Eraserhead. This is this very, like, surreal. It's set in a very surreal world that feels very removed from our own, does not feel like the world that we live in. The other one's based on a true story about a real man set in a real place, Victorian England. But I think, and I was actually talking to Gary about this the other day, I think, when we were hanging out, but I think that Brooks saw something in Lynch's film that reminded him of himself a little bit as a filmmaker. And that's a weird thing to think about when you think of Mel Brooks movies versus David Lynch movies. But Mel Brooks movies are filled with gag after gag after gag, one absurd moment followed by another absurd moment. And Lynch's films, when you think of Eraserhead, it's kind of the same thing. They're obviously going for a different reaction, but Eraserhead is filled with one absurd gag after another. So I think that maybe Brooks saw something saw something in a guy using similar techniques, but for a very different reaction. And I also think, and this is the big one, I also think that in watching Eraserhead, he could tell that David Lynch understood the idea of alienation, which is very important to the character of John Merrick in The Elephant Man. He understands what it's like to feel different from everybody else.
Well, I think you're absolutely right on that because, I mean, not to get too far ahead of us, this isn't a straightforward, like, it's not a biopic.
No, not quite.
Yeah. So looking at Eraserhead and knowing that that's not true to life either.
Right.
But it is very much a movie that gets you to examine how you feel and gets you to feel. I think maybe that spoke to Mel Brooks a little bit. Of just kind of like exactly like what you were saying. He understood the feeling. He understood what it is to feel alienated, what it is to feel paranoid that everyone you meet is going to have it out for you or try to do you harm,
exploit you.
Yeah, exploit you. And God, working in Hollywood, it's an industry full of that, let alone just life in general. So
yeah,
I think it might not be on the surface, but if you take a minute to kind of look at the totality of circumstances and the totality of the artwork put forth by both individuals, this kind of aligns.
Yeah.
I think the isolation thing is a big part of it. I feel like,
yeah.
I think the first part you mentioned too was what hit me when I was watching it, is like maybe he also just felt like Lynch was fearless in a way, like unencumbered by what a lot of directors might be, like feeling like they've got to do a certain thing a certain way. And
that's true.
And that goes to like even what you're talking about with the gag thing. Maybe he just was like, this guy's not afraid to just go for it and be weird and just take risks, basically.
Yeah. That's true. Very true. So with Mel Brooks on board and fully behind the film and fully behind Lynch, he told Sanger and Kornfeld which studios he was going to pitch to. He's like, I'm going to go to pitch to so-and-so and so-and-so. And they're like, they told him, those studios already passed on the project. And Mel Brooks's response was, they passed to you. Nobody wants to say no to me. And remember, this is right after Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. Like those two movies were his most recent movies. They came out the same year. They were both huge hits. So like he had a lot of power in Hollywood at this time. And he was right. It was not long before Paramount and Columbia were calling him back to be a part of the film. Now, I do want to mention this because I found this really fascinating. Pauline Kael. Remember Pauline Kael, who we talked about in our last episode? She was one of the critics who championed Eraserhead. She had actually had a big part in getting Paramount to sign on to The Elephant Man because at the time, she was actually employed as a reader for the studio. So she would read scripts and give them recommendations on which scripts she thought it was worth them buying and making the movie. So after she read the script for The Elephant Man, she told them, she said, if you make one movie at Paramount, make The Elephant Man. So not only was she a champion for Eraserhead, but she helped the Elephant Man get made, which is wild. And also another guy involved here. This is just a fun story that I found. Michael Eisner. Michael Eisner would later famously run Disney during its 1990s Renaissance. I'm sure a lot of our listeners probably know who Michael Eisner
did he
is.
get into this for all the wrong reasons?
He thought it was a sequel to Dumbo, and
Right.
just
Exactly.
Well,
yeah.
no, at the time he was the president of Paramount back in the early 1980s, and he had seen Eraserhead. He enjoyed it. He felt like it really showcased a director with remarkable talent. So, when they're starting to work on The Elephant Man, he asks to meet David Lynch. And he was so surprised by Lynch. This guy walks in just impeccably dressed, very unwaveringly polite. This Midwestern Jimmy Stewart type walks through the door, and that's who he meets. And he was so surprised by David Lynch's look, because he expected like someone who looked like Pablo Picasso to walk in. He expected this like eccentric guy to walk in. He actually accused Mel Brooks of hiring an actor to play David Lynch for their meeting. I just love that story. I think that's so funny because David Lynch, there's a lot of contrast between him as a character, as a person, and the films that he creates. A lot of people are surprised by him.
It's so weird you said Jimmy Stewart. I can't remember if you said that in the last episode or not. But
I probably did. I compare him to Jimmy Stewart a lot. He just reminds me of him.
Yeah, that's so right.
So once David Lynch was officially hired as the film's director, the first order of business was to streamline DeVore and Bergman's script, which was far too long at 200 pages. That's like a 3.5-hour long movie. So Lynch and Brooks, they were actually the driving forces on the rewrite. I mean, DeVore and Bergman were involved in the rewrite as well, but Lynch and Brooks kind of were driving the whole thing, with Brooks specifically making contributions to make the story more dramatic, even if it changed events from how they happened in real life. He actually said, Mel Brooks said, "It doesn't matter what really took place. Our concern is how this operates emotionally as a movie."
Yep. There's that. How you feel. How does this story make you feel? Yeah.
Yeah, it's based on a true story. It doesn't mean that every moment is true, right?
Exactly.
Because not everything works in a movie. Whereas I think DeVore and Bergman's original script was a little more like, this is exactly what happened.
More of a biopic.
And Mel Brooks and David Lynch came in to make it more dramatic. So they added some tension to the story that didn't exist in Merrick's real life. Like by day in the film, Merrick comes to be loved by the hospital staff. He's eventually embraced and admired by London's high society. But by night, he's exploited by this night porter character, right? Which leads to some of the film's most like hard to stomach scenes, like seeing him mistreated. It's very hard to watch. And this juxtaposition, that didn't happen in real life. Like him being exploited by the night porter, from everything I've been able to read, that was a complete fiction that they added to the script. But I think it's really interesting because that juxtaposition between Merrick's daytime life and these kind of nightmarish evenings is the same kind of duality that we'll see in a lot of David Lynch's work, especially in Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks. And then there's a lot of duality in David Lynch's films, either contrasting stuff like that or characters who are doubles of each other, or they have doubles. Like you're going to see that a lot throughout his filmography. And there's another duality in the script, which is also at least partially fictionalized, with John Merrick's two fathers. You've got the caring, sympathetic Treves, and then the cruel Mr. Bites, I think is his name, the guy who thinks he owns John Merrick at the circus, which Mr. Bites did not exist. He's based on a guy who really did exist, but he had a completely different name. His name was not Mr. Bites. They made a lot of that character up for dramatic purposes for the script. And I think it works better. I mean, I have not read the original script, but I cannot imagine this film without those elements, without the night porter and the Mr. Bites elements, because otherwise it's just like a sad story without any real tension other than like, you just feel bad for this guy,
Now we're back to the vibe thing. You got to get those right vibes going in the movie. And I think it was in the Criterion DVD or something, but Lynch talks about that Mel Brooks took him and the two writers and put them in a room opposite his office. And so they didn't even type, that Mel would come in and offer input as they were going, but they basically just passed around a pad, like they took turns writing.
I don't think any of them knew how to type.
Yeah, maybe. He just said they all took turns writing it down. And he said they got tuned into something. He says within a couple of months, they had the whole thing locked down. But interesting in that interview is him talking about the catching the ideas thing.
Yeah.
Again, because he
catching
says
the big fish.
Yeah, he talks about it. I think his exact quote was like, "I love ideas. A script is just organized ideas." Basically says like you could read a script and it comes alive in your brain, and the most important thing is you're following what's in your head, which is the same as he's like meditating on a story and then just also following what's in your head. But he says either way you get it, it doesn't really matter how you do it as long as you're staying true to the thing that's inside your head.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. I mean, I love that because I love that philosophy as far as storytelling goes.
Yeah, I think you hear this a lot with adaptations of different things of it's made in the spirit of, it evokes that. I mean, coming from, this is a weird comparison to make, but I'm known for weird comparisons. So like looking at a lot of comic book movies, a lot of them aren't strictly true adaptations of a particular graphic novel or, a series run or something like that, but it's made in the spirit of, so it's to evoke all those feelings and emotions and thoughts that you have about that particular property. So
yeah, absolutely. So as soon as funding for the film was secured, casting someone to play John Merrick became a top priority. Now, lots of names were bounced around. Dustin Hoffman was heavily considered because they felt like, having a major star in the role. This was like when Dustin Hoffman was one of the biggest names in Hollywood. They're like, that's going to help us get a bigger budget, but it's also going to be more difficult for a star of his caliber to disappear into the character, which was a bit of a concern. Now, David Lynch, he wanted Jack Nance for the role, his old buddy Jack Nance, Henry Spencer from Eraserhead, but Brooks felt like Lynch needed to work with an actor who would take him out of his comfort zone. I love that because I feel like Mel Brooks, and you'll hear this similar stories throughout the film, he's really almost mentoring David Lynch and teaching him and forcing him to become a better director. And this is an example of that. So Brooks and Sanger, they wanted John Hurt for the role, largely due to his performance in the 1975 film The Naked Civil Servant.
Which for folks nowadays, 1975 is one thing, but nowadays naked civil servants are not, the practice is frowned upon.
Yeah. So at the time, Hurt was in the middle of Montana. He was shooting Michael Cimino's doomed epic Heaven's Gate, but he would be visiting LA to attend the Academy Awards because he'd actually been nominated for a Best Supporting Actor for his role in Midnight Express. And Brooks set up a meeting with Hurt while he was in town. He called his agent, set up a meeting so that they could meet. And he and Lynch met with John Hurt and kind of pitched the Elephant Man to him. And it did not take a lot of convincing. Hurt and Lynch hit it off right away. They really liked each other right off the bat. And after that initial meeting, Hurt was pretty much on board to take on the role of John Merrick, the Elephant Man.
So how about I send you a hobo's dick cheese? That's another less gross.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you think John Hurt? I mean, it feels like he's game for anything. To see interviews with him, I do feel like he's a big part of the success of the movie as Merrick because he talks about just
fantastic.
how much physicality he put into it, but then also
Yeah.
how to do that, but also give the guy dignity was a huge part for him. And I just loved hearing him kind of talk about the process, basically about getting the makeup and all that. I mean, even Lynch says in one interview about how I always feel like when people describe having to go through the makeup process that they're exaggerating it a little bit. And he was like, but legitimately, when John would sit down, it was like, it'd be like hours and hours of process.
I think John Hurt at one point said that this was the movie that made him finally managed to make him hate acting. He says that like jokingly, I mean, obviously he loves the film and loves his work on it. And loves the end product. But yeah, just the whole process of the makeup, which we'll get into in a bit, was a bit grueling for him.
Oh, yeah.
But it is a phenomenal performance, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned there was mention of the physicality of it, because that was one thing I was looking at during, and there's certain areas where you see John Merrick move from point A to point B. If you pull up Joseph Merrick's Wikipedia page, they have a photo of his skeleton and how someone with that has to move. It's impressive that, because sometimes you can kind of see through the prosthetics and see the actor. There is no John Hurt. Like
no, he fully becomes John
between the voice, between the movement, and then prosthetics on top of that, he becomes Joseph Merrick. He becomes
he really does. It is one of those like all-time great performances. And for an actor to be able to like have no vanity about it and not care that he's not recognizable in the role, to just fully embrace that and just fully disappear into the role. Just shows you how, I mean, John Hurt is one of the great actors of all time, I think. And this is one of his, if not his most celebrated role, probably. And he had just done, this was like a year after Alien. So it wasn't like he was an unknown. I mean, and like I said, he had just been nominated for an Academy Award for Midnight Express, which they originally, before David Lynch was on board, they wanted Alan Parker, I think is the director's name, who did Midnight Express. That's who Mel Brooks originally wanted. I don't think they ever got into any actual negotiations with him or anything. But yeah, so John Hurt was not like, he was not as well known as like a Dustin Hoffman, but he wasn't like a no-name guy.
Yeah.
Like people knew who John Hurt was, if only from Alien, because that is, again, one of the most iconic movie scenes of all time, and immediately was.
Well, and one more thing about the prosthetics. I think there's a tendency, like surface level, to be like, oh, it's so uncomfortable, and you're like, yeah, you're a movie star. This is you're getting paid to play make believe. Like, this is not unheard of, that the prosthetic process makes people question their profession. Like Jeffrey Dean Morgan famously, and here comes your Star Trek reference, was in an episode of Enterprise and was buried in prosthetics to a point where he was dangerously close to quitting acting. Wow. And look at stuff since, like, if he's in prosthetics, it is minimal at best.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a grueling process. Look at the stuff that Dave Bautista and company went through on Guardians of the Galaxy. They're having to do stuff like prop their arms up because it's not just their face, it's most of their body. Like, it's
I mean, there are some actors who just refuse to do prosthetic work, and I don't blame them. Then there are guys like Doug Jones who, like, that's their entire career.
Yep.
And he's always under prosthetics, and he's just gotten used to the process, I guess.
Yeah.
So already on The Elephant Man, this whole process, this whole pre-production process that they're beginning, has been entirely different from what Lynch had done with Eraserhead. He had meetings with producers, contacting actors' agents, rewriting the script with a co-author, which he hasn't done before. All of this, the entire process of making a quote-unquote real Hollywood movie was completely new to David Lynch, although he did not doubt his ability to handle it. Like, he didn't think that this was going to be over his head. He will question himself later on, but at least initially he's like, I can do this. He was, after all, kind of a golden child. This guy who had managed to accomplish anything he'd set his mind to his entire life. In fact, his initial approach to The Elephant Man was not unlike his approach to Eraserhead. Somewhat naively, he had planned on being as hands-on with this film as he had been with his debut, including doing all of the makeup himself. Now, Brooks and Sanger, they didn't think this was a very good idea, but to their credit, they did let David Lynch have a go at it. So not long after Hurt had returned to Montana to resume shooting Heaven's Gate, Lynch and his wife Mary, they traveled there, and David Lynch made a full body cast of the actor of John Hurt, which he would use as the basis for the prosthetics. So,
this goes to what you were saying, Justin, about Brooks being sort of a mentor. One of the things is to step back and just kind of like, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm going to let you learn your lessons on your own.
Exactly.
I was about to say, you didn't say it so ominously, but it feels like you're foreshadowing an ego check.
Yeah. Yeah. Or like, it's like when a parent like lets their kid fall down so that they learn that it hurts to fall down, that kind of thing. I'm not a parent, but they got to learn.
My dad let me fall a lot.
My dad pushed me down a lot.
I assume it was for the best.
My dad gave me to a room full of people specifically to knock me down and kick me in the face.
But you know what I mean? Like, you got to learn your lessons on your own sometimes.
Right. And I mean, this is, I don't want to get too far ahead, but yeah, this is a hard lesson learned, but a good lesson learned.
Yeah. He definitely a lesson learned regardless. So with a finished script in hand, Lynch, Sanger, and Brooks, they headed to London to start the pre-production. And the shoot would primarily take place at a small studio called Lee Studios, a recently remodeled television studio located in Wembley, which is about 45 minutes northwest of the city. Now, with the exception of Anne Bancroft and John Hurt, the casting was all done right there in London. Anthony Hopkins was cast in the lead role of Sir Frederick Treves. Although he had been working as an actor since the early 60s, his role in Elephant Man was his first really significant Hollywood role, and it is largely considered kind of like his breakthrough role. Respected English actors Sir John Gielgud and Dame Wendy Hiller were cast in the roles of Com Gore. Com Gore, by the way, sounds like a Star Trek character. name,
It's
right?
dangerously close. Yeah.
Or a Star Wars character, like it. But that was a guy's real name.
You expect him to be telling Bajoran workers to get back to work.
Calm Gore. Who names their kid Calm? But anyway, that was Sir John Gielgud, and then Mrs. Mothershead was Dame Wendy Hiller. And having both of them on the film, that's a big deal. That lends a lot of credibility and a lot of gravitas to the film.
And I mean, besides them being essentially knighted by the Queen over there, John Gielgud knighted in 53, Wendy Hiller knighted in 75. Gielgud's also an EGOT winner. And Holler actually had won an Oscar before this. So besides their titles, they also had resumes to back them up.
Yeah.
Also,
John Gielgud had been in Arthur just a year before this, which is one of, I think, the best comedies of the 80s.
Oh, yes.
He plays Arthur's butler in that. He's fantastic because he's like the straight man to Dudley Moore. I love Arthur. It's such a great movie. The original, not the fucking Russell Brand bullshit.
Bingo.
Although J.K. Rowling's name is a bit like Voldemort's these days, I will say Gielgud was her inspiration for Dumbledore.
That makes sense.
Really? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I believe that. He's so like regal. I don't know how else to explain it. Like and David Lynch loved him. Like he described him like he's like, this guy never got a speck of dust on him. He never got dirt. He's the cleanest man I've ever met. He said that John Gielgud smoked these cigarettes that were oval shaped instead of round, that he got specifically made for him at a shop in London. And he had this way of smoking them where the ash and the smoke would never get on his shirt. Like he just was like just perfectly put together at all times.
Wow.
And a consummate professional at all times.
Jeez.
David Lynch speaks very, very highly of him. So speaking of the cast, though, Freddie Jones, who plays the villainous Mr. Bites, he was a little bit tougher to cast. He had a little pushback on it, actually. They wanted him. He pushed back a little bit. David Lynch liked him right away, but Jones felt that the character was a little too one note. He was just a mean bastard, basically. And he wanted his character to be more than just this asshole who beats up a defenseless man. So Lynch, he understood that. He actually went through the entire script from that character's point of view and revised it to make the character's feelings for John Merrick a little bit more complex, which I think can be seen in the final film.
Freddie Jones would actually go on to do, a lot, but he was on...
Including a few more David Lynch movies.
Yes, indeed. This is actually part one of the Freddie Jones trilogy on Cinema Shock. But he was in a stage production of The Dresser. A critic actually said that his portrayal of, I want to make sure I get this right, his performance in The Dresser was actually better than Anthony Hopkins, who played same role on television in 2015. So, there's no slouches on this set. There's a lot of really good actors in this.
It's really impressive. They even tried casting real life sideshow performers for the freak show scenes in the film, but they didn't have much luck as sideshows had kind of gone out of style by the 1950s. And of course, advances in medicine had prevented the types of physical deformities that are often seen in those types of shows. They were, however, able to cast the Giant and several dwarfs through a specialty agency, which was the name of the agency was called Ugly, which seems rude. It was just called Ugly. Capital U, Ugly was the name of the casting agency. Wow. And they cast people that had physical deformities, kind of, so they cast the Giant, they cast the dwarves. Keen-eyed viewers will notice that one of the dwarfs in the film is none other than Kenny Baker, R2-D2 himself. He's got a speaking role in this, but if you know who Kenny Baker, he's also in Time Bandits, of course. He's there. And the other characters in the freak show were created by Lynch in his art department. It's just prosthetics. Other significant roles in the film were filled by Hannah Gordon, who plays Anne Treves, Frederick Treves' wife, Michael Elphick as Jim, the night porter, the villainous night porter, Leslie Dunlap as Nora, who is Merrick's nurse, and Helen Ryan as Alexandra, Princess of Wales.
I looked up the actors and saw that Dunlap, surprisingly, for as many British actors and I'll say UK actors in this movie, Dunlop was one of the few who actually had some Doctor Who credits, and they're Doctor Who in the 80s. So who
would that doctor have been?
Probably would have been Sylvester McCoy, maybe Peter Davison. I didn't get that specific, but that's probably where it landed, or depending on when, it may have even been.
Was she guest starring, or was it like a?
Yeah, it was guest star.
She wasn't like a companion, or
no, she wasn't a companion. The other thing was that Helen Ryan, who plays Alexandra, Princess of Wales, actually played the same character, Alexandra, Princess of Wales, 4 years later
Huh.
in a Grenada's produced Sherlock Holmes series. So I thought
Like a
that
TV
was,
series?
yeah, it was a TV series. It was a series of like standalone adventures. So
Okay.
yeah, it was kind of not serialized, but it's always with Sherlock. It was, I guess it would have been like the equivalent of
I mean, the Benedict Cumberbatch one
procedurals.
was kind of that way.
Yeah,
know.
kind of, yeah. But not necessarily like 90-minute episodes, more,
Right.
more compact for
Sure.
for
That's
television.
really
Yeah.
interesting that she played that character again. That's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
I just want to say, like, Lynch talks about this cast, and he just, like, with Eraserhead, he describes that everybody was perfect for their role, which in this movie, you could totally see that being possible. And how wild for David Lynch that you just did Eraserhead living on your own personal soundstage, basically.
Yeah.
At this
With a bunch of
and-
friends that or people you just met who were not established actors.
And now you're this naive young American guy coming to England, and you're shooting this Victorian drama with highly skilled professional.
Yeah.
I mean, John Hurt talks about in interviews how Gielgud was intimidating to him.
Yeah. Can you imagine
like-
intimidating to John Hurt?
Right. John Hurt is intimidated by who he's working with.
Yeah.
And so now David Lynch is here and he's directing all these people. Wild
Yeah,
step. For
David Lynch talks about it. I read in one interview where he's like, I before the shoot, I'm just thinking, like, I'm in my in my house in my underwear, getting ready for the day, and I'm just thinking, I've got to go direct Sir John Gielgud today. Like, what is going on here? Like, what has happened to my life?
Right.
Another little fun bit of trivia that I found out about the cast: the kid who plays the little boy who lives with Bites. He's just credited as Bites' boy. He's played by an actor named Dexter Fletcher. Now, Dexter Fletcher has gone on to have a big career with roles in all kinds of movies. He's in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Layer Cake, Topsy Turvy, The Patriot. Like he's gone on to have a pretty long career. And he's also had a successful career as a director. He actually replaced Bryan Singer on Bohemian Rhapsody when Bryan Singer walked off of that film. He was his replacement on that. Wow. And then he went on to direct the Elton John biopic, Rocket Man, which I thought was pretty good. Much better than Bohemian Rhapsody, in my opinion.
That is a discussion I want to have, because I haven't heard your specific reasons, but that is fascinating.
Yeah, and he also recently directed the Netflix action movie Ghosted, which has, I think, Chris Evans and Ana de Armas, right? Yeah, he directed that. And he also, and I'm only mentioning this for Todd's sake, he directed 2 episodes of The Offer, which is the miniseries about the making of The Godfather.
Yeah!
Oh my God.
Available now on Paramount Plus.
What are the chances?
When I came across that, I was like, really? This again? Oh, man. I thought you would like that, Todd.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
One day I'm going to watch that.
My thoughts and feelings are validated. Yay! I don't know what kind of Pan-Pacific bullshit power play you're trying to pull here, but Asia, Jack, is my territory. So whatever you're thinking, you better think again. Otherwise, I'm going to have to head down there and I will rain down an ungodly fucking firestorm upon you. You're going to have to call the fucking United Nations and get a fucking binding resolution to keep me from fucking destroying you. I'm talking scorched earth, motherfucker. I will massacre you. I will fuck you up.
So David Lynch still continued to live modestly while living in England. By the end of the shoot, he said that he had actually saved up enough of his per diem to purchase a new car when he got back to California. So he's like still eating just cheese sandwiches and stuff in his house there. He had rented this small house in Wembley, which he shared with Jack Fisk. Jack Fisk is not credited on this film, but he came to England with him. So I don't know why. I guess he just wanted the company. I don't know. It was his buddy. He's like, "Why? Hey, you want to come to England with me? I got a house. Why not?" But it was at this house where they lived together that Lynch began to work on the prosthetic makeup for the Elephant Man in a garage that he had converted into a small studio. So he worked on this makeup throughout the film's 12-week pre-production period. But in the end, it was we'll call it a failed experiment. Unable to work on Hurt directly, the prosthetics that Lynch created were more akin to a sculpture or a mask than a prosthetic. It didn't really allow for much movement, and it wouldn't really blend well to Hurt's face.
So knowing how much of an artist David Lynch is, I don't suppose the prosthetics were saved or preserved.
I haven't seen anything about them being still in existence. He probably got pissed off and like threw them away or burned them.
Oh, bummer. I was
'Cause
going
he
to say,
was-
because that'd be a hell of an art piece, a David Lynch
Yeah.
art piece to have.
Yeah, he saw it as a failure, so he probably did not keep it. He was pretty devastated by this whole thing. Like he kind of felt like this was a sign that he wasn't cut out for the film, that maybe he was in over his head. In fact, he was so unsure. He said that there was a period of like 4 dark days, I think is what he says. He was so sure that he was a failure that he contemplated just quitting, leaving the film altogether. Because this is a guy, like I said earlier, this is a guy who had spent his entire life doing remarkable things, creating things with his hands, but he didn't have the skills or the knowledge to pull off this particular thing. Like he wasn't used to that.
He said it led to 4 very dark days where he was sure he was just getting fired.
Yeah.
From the thing. He says he was having nightmares so bad that he would like wake up and still want to go back to sleep. So he could just go back into the nightmare.
Well, he said the waking life was worse than the nightmares, the way that he felt during that time period.
Yeah, that's what I mean to say. Also, he was miserable too, because according to Mel Brooks, he wasn't used to the cold.
Yeah.
And then he also
Mel Brooks gave him a coat.
And he wasn't used to not having Bob's Big Burgers every day. And so Mel Brooks said he did find a burger spot in London though, and ate there every single day.
I do like that John Hurt, he was so polite when David Lynch tried these prosthetics on him, and his reaction to David Lynch was just like, well, it was a valiant effort. That was how he told him that, like, this is not going to work, buddy. But he was like very nice and very polite about it. Anyway, once again, Mel Brooks kind of stepped in to reassure Lynch because although Lynch's ego was hurt by his inability to create the movie's prosthetics, Brooks let him know that it in no way affected his faith in Lynch's abilities. He reassured Lynch that he and the other producers were behind him 1,000%. And Lynch later described Brooks' support for him as beyond the beyond, which is one of those David Lynch-isms, those turns of phrase that you hear him say a lot that I just love. It's just, there's something really charming about some of his Lynchisms. Anyway, once they realized that they needed to redo the makeup, Lynch and Sanger rearranged the shooting schedule so that the scenes without John Hurt, or at least the ones where he wasn't needed to be in makeup, like he could be under the thing, the like shroud thing that he wears. They were going to shoot all those first. But they couldn't spend too much time fretting over the makeup debacle because Anthony Hopkins had another film on his schedule and he had a hard stop date. So he had to be done by a certain date. So they couldn't like delay it for too long. So Sanger called up a makeup artist who was based there in London named Chris Tucker, not the Rush Hour guy, to step in to help.
Well, I actually found some interesting things about Chris Tucker. A lot of people don't realize he was a radio host for a while. His radio name was Ruby Rod.
I think you're talking about the Rush Hour guy.
And then he was also he worked with the LAPD for a little while on a couple of high profile cases with some international agents. It's interesting to see that Chris Tucker is kind of a.
I love that Justin tried to cut off that joke.
I just went with it anyway.
I was undeterred.
Listen, that shows my commitment to the bit.
Do you remember the scene in Elephant Man where John Merrick is learning to say the 23rd Psalm and he says, "Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?"
It was choreographed. Like I felt that coming. Okay.
Damn it.
Take Todd's job as a writer comedian here.
Damn it.
Yeah, look at this. I will say the Chris Tucker that was there was apparently also very good to Lynch, and that he and Lynch says him and Mel Brooks were both like very supportive and like.
I think he gave him a little shit at first.
Yeah.
I think he gave him a little shit about why did you think you were going to be able to do this?
Well, yeah, but he says it's in a way to be like, this is not your job.
Yeah.
Like your
job is to direct. Let some delegate.
Exactly. I think he was being supportive, maybe in a smart ass way or something.
Yeah. Well, Tucker was a veteran of makeup effects, especially in horror films, and he told the producers that in order to do this job properly, he actually needed the original life cast of Joseph Merrick to work from. Now, that life cast, this was of course taken after Joseph Merrick passed away. It was the crown jewel in the permanent collection of the Royal London Hospital and Archives. They have like this museum area at the hospital there. So Lynch and Sanger went to see the head curator at the archives who, after a bit of convincing and a little bit of the old David Lynch charm, did agree to loan them the life cast, which is insane to me that they just gave them that. Yeah. But like David Lynch was sort of like, I don't want to say naive, but I'll say naive enough to just ask if they could use it. And
Yeah.
the guy,
Yeah.
like, he didn't say yes right away, but he eventually did say yes. They eventually like talked him into it.
It's wicked to hear him talk about it, saying you could like feel hairs in it that were like
Yeah,
the
where,
actual
like, where
hairs
the-
of Merrick. You know?
That got stuck in like the plaster and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they have his skeleton there, and they used to have some of his organs like preserved in I guess formaldehyde or whatever, but they got destroyed when London was bombed during World War II.
Fucking Nazis.
I know they ruin everything.
They
don't
targeted the Elephant Man.
Damn it. I was
I-
I was surprised to learn that those remains were not at Neverland Ranch.
it wasn't for lack of trying. Michael Jackson definitely tried to get that skeleton at one point.
I was
Ed?
looking. I kept asking Justin, "Are we going to talk about Michael Jackson?" And you were like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Because he wanted the Elephant Man."
I was
That
expecting
the
you
whole
to bring it up sometime during the show, but no,
Oh, well,
Todd
I
had to
guess
go and do it.
thing. Todd did it.
Aren't
So,
there
I
also
don't-
clips from the Elephant Man in one of his music videos?
Yeah, there's one of I forget which one it is.
I think
now,
it's
and
one
I
off
even,
of like history, like a
Yeah.
later period or something.
Mm.
It
Has
was
some clips
later.
from the Elephant Man.
I don't know what his attraction was to it. He's on Oprah in an interview saying that none of that was true, but there are plenty of articles.
That
Yeah.
Michael Jackson said it wasn't true.
Yeah,
There's a lot of things
Yeah.
about that is said about Michael Jackson that he has said is not true.
Yeah.
unreliable narrator.
Right. So while having this live cast did make it easier, Tucker still worked slowly, and the makeup for the head alone took him about 8 weeks to complete. And it involved 15 different overlapping sections fashioned out of soft foam. And since each piece could only be used once, Tucker had to cook a new set every single day. He had like an oven in his warehouse studio there. He had to remake these every day. And applying the makeup took about 7 hours. So during the shoot, Hurt would work on alternating days so that he could be in makeup one day, take the next day off, because it was grueling. He would have to arrive on set at 5 a.m., sit for 7 hours while the makeup's put on him. He was unable to eat, so he would occasionally sip on a mixture of raw eggs and orange juice.
Follow me for more great recipes.
Have you tried that? Is that part of your regimen?
I'm going to be integrating it this week. Yeah.
It sounds fucking disgusting.
That's awful.
It sounds terrible. But he could only drink through a straw, so that's
Yeah.
why he had to do that. And he had to.
Yeah.
I guess the eggs gave him the protein that he needed.
Yeah.
So he would do that, and then he'd start shooting at about noon every day, and then go on until 10 at night. Then I think it still took like 2 hours probably to like take the makeup off of him.
Mm.
So then he's going home and getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep. Which tells you why he was off every other day. But there was no doubt that the makeup was effective. When he first walked on set as John Merrick, Hurt recalled, he said, quote, "You could have heard a pin drop. At that moment, we knew we had something." And the makeup, I think, it really is stunning. I think it's really good. Like you said, Todd, like you can't tell it's John Hurt. Like he completely disappears into it.
Yeah.
And I think in a very un-Lynchian move, they wait until about the half-hour mark to fully unveil the makeup. And Lynch, I think he did want to reveal it sooner, and John Hurt and Mel Brooks talked him into delaying the reveal.
Yeah.
Because before that point where you see him, you do see, his shadow, you see him under that like hood,
Mhm.
only able to kind of imagine what's under it. And I think I think they made the right move by delaying it,
Yeah, it's very smart.
Like we hear Merrick's labored breathing, so we know that there's something. That his breathing honestly reminded me of the baby in Eraserhead a little bit, like the way that he's kind of got that
wow.
labored breathing.
Yeah.
And then we see the stunned reactions of the people around him before we ever see him. And when we finally see him, it's an incredible moment in the film. It's both heartbreaking and it's like a mixture of heartbreak and terror. Because this nurse screams at the sight of him, like not trying to be cruel, because she's very nice to him throughout the movie, but she's shocked at this man that she's seeing. And he screams back, and he's sort of screaming because he is, she's horrified by the sight of him. He is horrified by his own ability to bring that out of her, to horrify her. He's horrified by his own ability to horrify.
Yeah.
So it's very sad. Like it really is, but it is a very memorable moment in the film, I think. So veteran British cinematographer Freddie Francis was the one chosen to shoot the film, mainly because of his expertise in black and white photography on films such as the classic Gothic horror film The Innocents, which was the 1961 adaptation of Turning of the Screw. Screw. It's a classic gothic horror film, and shot in this really beautiful stark black and white. He was a veteran of Hammer horror films, although by the time he was hired for The Elephant Man, he had actually not been a director of photography on a film for about 20 years. The Innocents was actually his last credit before he embarked on a directing career of his own. And during that time span, during that 2 decades, he directed more than 24 films, mostly for Hammer and for their rival studio Amicus, including classics like Dracula Has Risen from the Grave and Tales from the Crypt. And I don't think we can understate really how important Francis's work is on The Elephant Man. And I couldn't find any stories as to why they chose to shoot it in black and white, other than they just wanted to recreate the look of Victorian photography.
Oh, I was gonna get into that a little bit later when you ask, thoughts on the film, but yeah,
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really great.
Beautiful. Like Francis's work is really great. And while Lynch certainly deserves a lot of credit for the look of the film, Francis is the one that brought that vision to life. And the film, I think, is just like dripping in atmosphere from first frame to the last.
Said they took a bunch of photos, like different styles of photo and everything, to try to get the right look ahead of time. And he had like a dark room they would go into it to try to settle in on what the look of the film was going to be. Yeah. And I forget how old he was here, but I remember him saying that like
Francis would have been like in his 60s or pushing 70 probably by this point, maybe in his 70s. Well, I know that Lynch, because he goes on to shoot The Straight Story for David Lynch, which was 1999. And I think Lynch said in The Straight Story, Francis was like in his late 80s. So he would have been, if this was 17 years earlier, he would have been in his 70s at this point.
Because I know Lynch tells a story about how he was like, okay, well, can we keep it to like 8 hours a day? And I think it'd be all right. And
I think that was on The Straight Story though, not on this.
When
he says that, I think he's talking about The Straight Story because dude was pushing 90 at that point.
But he did say when they were going, he said I think he met him like in New York or something, like right before going over. But he said that it got down to like there were like 4 guys, and they narrowed it down to like 2. I don't think he even said who the other guy was, but Francis and this other guy, and they said that it finally came down to him and Sanger. They were like, we're going to flip a coin, and whoever it lands on, that's who we're going to pick, because they just couldn't make a decision. They were like, okay, you got a guy who's still steadily doing the camera stuff, or this guy who we know is good, but hasn't been doing it lately. So it was like, well, we'll flip a coin and see who wins. And he was like, so say Francis's heads, let's flip it and see what happens. He said they flipped the coin and it's tails. And he says, all right. And they both looked at each other and were like, it's Francis.
Coin is wrong. It's got to be Francis. I mean, they made the right call though.
Yeah, you mentioned it in that first little bit about Francis. I just want to go back and just reiterate again: 20 years, over 24 films.
Yeah,
that is incredible, especially for somebody.
Those Hammer movies got pumped out like crazy. Like those things would shoot for like a week or 2 and be done. You know,
but still, like that's an impressive ratio. Though.
Oh yeah, it really is. And I think after this, he did not really direct a whole lot else. He kind of fell back into just being a cinematographer. He directed like maybe 2 or 3 more movies after this, at least one of which was for Brooks Films, I believe, like in the late 80s or so. But he mostly, from here until the end of his career, he was mostly a cinematographer again from here on. Wow. Really interesting career trajectory, I think.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?
Hey, folks, real quick, if you've been listening to Cinema Shock for a while and you're one of the people who've been wanting to support the show, it's finally happening. We're giving you a way to do it.
That's right. We have finally launched a supporter program where you can throw a few bucks our way to help support the show. And in return, we're going to be providing you with some bonus content. If you've missed segments of the show, like the further viewing and somebody needs a nap, well, you are in luck. We'll be releasing extended episodes that will be exclusive to our supporters that will include those segments plus some other ones, mystery segments to come down the line as bonus content within the episode.
And don't worry, our tiers start at only $3. That's like giving us each $1 or 100 pennies. In addition to those extended episodes, we'll also have exclusive video content, merchandise discounts, and more.
Yeah, so just head to cinemashock.net, click on support, sign up now, and be excellent to each other.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?
So The Elephant Man ended up shooting for about 54 days, a lot shorter than Eraserhead. But for that 54 days, Lynch spent a lot of that time experiencing what I can only describe as imposter syndrome based on how he describes it. While he came into the project convinced that he'd be able to handle it. As things went on, his confidence got shaken a little bit. The makeup thing was a big part of that. He had come from this experience on Eraserhead where he was just undisturbed and just fully immersed in the creative process, literally living in the world of the film for a little while. And to a film like this, where that just was not the case. So while Brooks and his producers still fully believed in him, Lynch was experiencing a period of self-inflicted uncertainty that he described as the worst, darkest hell.
Jeez.
So no longer was he able to spend as much time as he wanted to set up a scene, tweaking every little detail in the frame, because now time was money. They had financiers and studios and producers to answer to. And this film, especially compared to Eraserhead, moved at a breakneck pace, hopping between real London locations, studio sound stages, and even the abandoned wards of the Eastern Hospital and the London Hospital.
One of the cool parts that Lynch talks about with this that I liked was he said that there could not have been more perfect timing about filming in London at the time. He said when they went there, there was like so much stuff, so many places to shoot, just all the old buildings that they had.
The old cobblestone ground and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And he said literally like the year after they shot this, most of those places got torn down and were replaced with newer buildings. And he said that, like we could not have timed this better because when we went, we had so many options of places to go to.
Now it would probably have to all be on sound stages. Even the hospital was, they shot in this part of the hospital that was, like I said, abandoned. The hospital wasn't. The hospital was in use, but there was like a wing of the hospital that was no longer in use. And it still looked like it did in Victorian times. Even it had electricity, but it was still outfitted for gas. So it still had those gas lamps and things like that in it. So, and all the beds and stuff were still there. And
talking about like his practice and the way he views things, he talks about going in that East London hospital and saying like he wasn't sure if he felt like he could envision how this worked like visually. And he said, but for some reason he remembers going into that place and it was like there, he was like standing in the hall and he said like all of a sudden like something just came over me and I understood Victorian England. He was like, I got it. I see it.
This guy just has like he has like an antenna that just picks up the like vibes from the universe, it feels like that, because that feels like the same thing that when he described that painting in our first episode and he felt a wind and saw a little movement, and he just felt like I needed to see this painting move and it led to something else. It kind of feels similar to that, but this film compared to something like Eraserhead, like this is prestige filmmaking. Like it's a big jump, and with all the baggage that comes along with such endeavors, which inevitably includes, prestige actors, some of whom really did wonder if Lynch, who, they described him as skittering around in this Crombie coat that was gifted to him by Brooks and a big floppy hat. They wondered whether he was out of his element, whether he was in over his head. And at one point, things boiled over for Anthony Hopkins, who bellowed to Lynch and on set. He said, "Will you come out from behind that fucking coat and hat for fuck's sake? We can't hear a word that you're saying," which prompted one of the few screaming matches of Lynch's career, because Lynch is usually kind of like very calm and collected on set, but that like triggered him, and Hopkins even went so far as to put in a call to Mel Brooks to express his concern. Lynch said that he tried to get him fired. Stuart Kornfeld says that he didn't really try to get him fired, but he basically did without saying the words. But Brooks once again stood by David Lynch. He stood by his guy. And Hopkins wasn't the only one to question Lynch's experience. Dame Wendy Hiller, who was, a 40-year veteran of stage and screen, she made her feelings known early on in the shoot when she grabbed Lynch by the neck by his collar and marched him around her dressing room, telling him, "I don't know you, and I'm going to be watching you." That sentiment wouldn't last long, though, and Hiller, like so many others, came to trust Lynch, and the two learned to love each other. Like, they got along really well after that. As the shoot went on. Hopkins, on the other hand, according to Lynch, maintained a sullen attitude throughout. That's how Lynch described it. They never he did his job. You know, he did his job. He was professional as far as that goes, but he was never like buddy with Lynch. Although later on in life, he said that Lynch was one of the finest directors he'd ever worked with. This was maybe after Hopkins was older and a little more mellow, you know, and being a little more political in the way that he speaks about such things. But at the time, they never worked together again.
Yeah.
Well, I think isn't it in Lynch on Lynch when they even ask him about that and he says the less said is better.
Yeah.
So they didn't get along. But I also saw that this role was like what Demi who directed Silence of the Lambs,
Jonathan Demme.
Yeah, Demi saw this and like this is what he was thinking of when he wanted to get Anthony Hopkins for Silence of the Lambs and that kind of thing. So
it did a lot for his career.
Yeah.
And as the shoot went on and his actors began to trust him, Lynch's confidence did begin to grow. He came out of his shell a little bit. His authority grew. He began to take charge on set, and he got used to handling actors, these real, like, highly seasoned actors. And Soup began to realize that there were things that were going to happen on a film set that were just completely out of his control. So he began to focus on things that he needed to control. And as it turned out, as The Elephant Man would ultimately prove, Lynch was an actor's director. And despite their clashes, he directed Anthony Hopkins to give one of the best performances of his career. And John Hurt would ultimately receive an Academy Award nomination for his role in the film. So like he worked very well with the actors once they got past the point that this is a 33, 34-year-old inexperienced guy that we've never heard of from Montana of all places, who's coming over to England to direct all of these like Shakespearean stage trained actors. But once they got over that and began to trust him, like he got great performances out of everyone in the film. Now, at one point during the shoot, Lynch's wife Mary became pregnant with twins, but the pregnancy was a pretty difficult one. She ended up being hospitalized for 3 weeks. So for those 3 weeks, Lynch would shoot during the day and then visit Mary in the hospital at night. And she later, unfortunately, miscarried that pregnancy and eventually had to travel back to the U.S. for further medical observations while Lynch stayed behind in England. So this is not an easy time for him either. I mean, his wife is hospitalized and then she has to leave while he's thousands of miles away.
Jesus.
But as the production began to wind down, Lynch found a location about an hour outside of London that he thought would be perfect for a sequence set in Belgium. The very short sequence in the film, but very important sequence in the film. But the film couldn't afford a costly location shoot this late in the game, so they decided to recreate the scene on a soundstage. But needing a larger facility than the one in Wembley offered, they moved the production to Shepperton Studios, which was large enough to accommodate not only the shooting of the sequence, but also all of the film's post-production needs. So it was there in Shepperton that the film was eventually completed. And as the film entered post-production, Alan Splett, our old friend Alan Splett, who worked on Eraserhead and The Grandmother, he traveled over to England to work with Lynch on the film's sound design, much to the annoyance of the British sound department, who had worked on the film throughout the shoot, because sound design, you see, was a bit of a new concept at the time. So a lot of the old British film veterans didn't really see the point in bringing in this outsider to work on the film's sound after the shooting was already done. So the film's music score, The Elephant Man's music score, was conducted by John Morris, who was one of Mel Brooks's frequent collaborators. And it went pretty well, but he and Lynch did disagree on one point when it came to the film's music. See, at the end of the film, when we see the final image of Merrick's mother, Lynch wanted to use Samuel Barber's composition Adagio for strings, but Morris disagreed, saying that the piece was in danger of being overused. But when they screened the film for Mel Brooks, they screened this scene in two different versions, one with Adagio for strings and one with Morris's music that he'd written for the sequence. And then after the scene played, Brooks turned to Morris and said, "Sorry, John, but David's version works better." And that was that. Like, once again, Mel Brooks sticking with David Lynch's decisions. So Lynch, he worked with an editor on this one by the name of Ann V. Coates. But while they're working on the edit for the film together, EMI Films, who had been one of the film's financiers, independently worked on their own cut without Lynch's involvement, without anyone's involvement. And then they called Mel Brooks and told him that they had a cut of the film for him to watch. And he refused to watch it, saying that he intended to go with Lynch's version. Like, he would not even look at their cut of the film.
Ballsy.
Hey, it's his movie.
Yeah, what? No, I'm saying of EMI to be like, hey,
yeah.
we've gone ahead and just
we just went ahead and did this for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lynch has nothing but good stuff to say about Mel Brooks. Like he just says, he said working with him was sort of close to heaven, I think is the exact words he uses. Just people don't understand how super intelligent, caring, and like just a special guy he was. But he says, this was a Brooks film picture, and he could have done whatever he wanted to do, but he backed me up and gave me a huge break in life that was phenomenal. So thanks to the world of Mel Brooks. By the way, when we took our little pause break for a second there, I was like, why did Mel Brooks get David Lynch? I was like, did I not do enough Google foo to figure this out? And there is an interview with Mel Brooks in The Guardian where he is answering that question. And he says, I guess it was the outsider aspect that appealed to me. And that's where I think we met mentally. My films, even if they're comic, they're about, let's accept the bizarre. Let's learn more about these creatures or these Jews. I know the Elephant Man isn't Jewish, but to me, the story had all the aspects of anti-Semitism, and Merrick had all the traits of the classic wandering Jew. But that was his answer to that.
Oh, that's interesting. That's not far from where we were landing on it, though.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, he said that he ended up getting to make his cut and send it to Brooks, and Brooks watched it with like a little. He said that Brooks ended up watching one of his with like John Hurt in the screening. He said that he said it got a great reaction, so he wasn't sure what to expect from anybody, but at least from those guys, they were into it.
Yeah, and Lynch's first cut of the film was like 3 hours long, but that was later edited down to just over 2 hours. I think it comes in at 2 hours and 6 minutes in the final form. So Mel Brooks actually contractually had final cut on the film. So he could do whatever he wanted, but he deferred to Lynch on it, kind of let Lynch come up with his own. And he had some notes after that initial screening when they watched it, but he didn't force Lynch to make any cuts. He just made suggestions. And he trusted David Lynch, even when Lynch made kind of unconventional choices, like the surreal sequences that bookend the film, the elephant one and the one with the mother at the end. And in fact, when they screened the film for Paramount, Michael Eisner and Paramount CEO Barry Diller, they both thought the film was great, but their note was like they asked if they could cut out the elephant stuff from the beginning and the mom from the end, the mother image from the end. And Mel's response was to tell them, he said, quote, "We are involved in a business venture. We screened the film for you to bring you up to date as to the status of that venture. Do not misconstrue this as our soliciting the input of raging primitives." I love that. To have Mel Brooks in your corner, right?
Right. Please, let's get that on a pillow or something. That's a great
great quote.
Yeah, it's a great quote.
It's a great quote. So by September of 1980, Lynch had a finished print of the film and returned to LA, where promotion of the film began immediately. Lynch himself continued to be pretty nervous about the film, about how it would be received, and he actually refused to attend either the cast and crew screening of the film or the film's official premiere. He just couldn't do it. It was too nervous about it. But it turns out his fears were unfounded. When the film was released on October 3rd, 1980, it actually received somewhat mixed reviews, but it became a commercial hit, bringing in $26 million at the North American box office on a budget of only $5 million.
Not too shabby.
No, not at all. And one of the reviews from the time of its release, Vincent Canby, writing in the New York Times, called Hurt's performance remarkable and praised the film's visuals, saying, quote, "The physical production is beautiful, especially Freddie Francis's black and white photography." But not everyone was so kind. Like I said, reviews were a little bit mixed. Roger Ebert actually gave the film just 2 out of 4 stars and called the film pure sentimentalism. It was weird that the reviews at the time were somewhat mixed. I mean, like I said, Vincent Canby gave it a great one, but Roger Ebert gave it a not so great one. Pauline Kael gave it a raving review, but other critics didn't. It's like some people thought it was maybe too sentimental. That seemed to be the main point of criticism towards it at the time. But despite the mixed reception that the film received, it went on to garner 8 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Director, Actor, Adapted Screenplay, Editing, Original Score, and art direction, which was by Stuart Craig, Robert Cartwright, and Hugh Scaffey, and costume design by Patricia Norris. Although it did not win a single one of those, it lost Best Picture and Best Directing nominations to Robert Redford's Ordinary People. Now Lynch didn't really care. It didn't seem like that he won. He was actually upset that Freddie Francis didn't get a nomination for his cinematography. I think when he was told that news, he's like, "This is bullshit," was his exact quote.
That's fair.
I agree. Yeah. Freddie Francis did win a BAFTA, which is the British version of the Academy Awards. I think the movie, the BAFTAs won Best Director, Best Picture, and Best Cinematography, if I remember correctly.
Nice.
I know Freddie Francis did win some awards for this, just not at the Academy Awards. But after it lost at the Oscars, Mel Brooks said, and I love this, another wonderful quote from Mel Brooks. He said, 10 years from now, Ordinary People will be the answer to a trivia question. The Elephant Man will be a movie people are watching. I mean, here we are. We're doing an episode about the Elephant Man and not Ordinary People. I've never seen Ordinary People, and I don't really have much desire to. I know it because I know that it's a Robert Redford movie that won a lot of awards. I think Donald Sutherland's in it. That's all I know about it. Martin, to tell you though how the Oscars went that year, David Lynch was sitting in front of at the ceremony. Martin Scorsese was in the row behind him. Martin Scorsese was there because Raging Bull and Martin Scorsese were both nominated for Best Director and Best Picture, and they also lost to Ordinary People. And how many people are talking about Ordinary People over Raging Bull?
Yeah.
Now, right? So the awards don't matter in the long run.
That always feels that way, though, with the Oscars.
A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, the movies that win are not necessarily the movies that people are going to be talking about 10, 15, 20 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, Mel Brooks was quoted as saying, "And less than 10 years from now, I'm going to remake that scene from Aliens with John Hurt."
But I'm going to make him dance.
Yeah.
But that alien is going to dance with a top hat and a cane.
Yep. Honestly, one of the better scenes from Spaceballs.
Yeah, truly.
It's like the most memorable scene from Spaceballs. In my
that and Combing the Desert. I always laugh at Combing the Desert. That's
also
a good one.
always makes me laugh. And then he says, "We ain't seen shit.
We ain't seen shit."
All right, here's another Star Trek reference. The guy that says that played Tuvok on Star Trek Voyager.
No shit, really?
Tim Russ.
Oh, whoa.
That guy is Tim Russ.
I did not know that. How about that? Were there any Star Trek alumni in Elephant Man that you found?
Not that I came across. No.
Well, you'll find at least one in Dune. I'll tell you that.
I think, yeah, there might be at least one. Yeah.
There's definitely at least one. And he's
I know.
He's a fairly prominent role in Star Trek.
Got lots of sand in my knickers.
So let's talk a little bit about our thoughts on the Elephant Man. First of all, just tell me, so you enjoyed Elephant Man, or you admire it? Yeah.
Yeah. So I've said as much about some of the performances already. I did want to talk about Freddie Francis and his cinematography because I forgot his cinematography looked so good. I forgot this was made in 1980 or that this came out in 1980. It felt very 19 40s. Yeah. Like it felt, and I think we even had somebody Needs a Nap reviews said something about it feeling like a play or like a stage play or something along those lines. And that kind of took me back to looking at how it was shot. It kind of had that same element where at that time period, films were basically stage plays. They just turned a camera on, and it had that feel sometimes. I don't think that made it bad, but it evoked a time period, and they were trying to make this feel very authentic to the time. And Victorian England versus 1930s 1940s cinema are two very separate things, but that's probably as close as you're going to get and have a cohesive sellable movie. I like that David Lynch put his thoughts and feelings into a story that was not his,
but still made it his own.
And I feel like with separation from the source material, it allowed him to lend objectivity and like kind of speak on those things. Again, we already talked about they were concerned about not necessarily accuracy, historical accuracy, but how this story of this real man made you feel, and talking about some of those things. So I feel like that came across really well. It's really solid. It's a really solid film. And yeah, it's sad, but like Shakespeare did sad stuff too. And like, and you
Right.
said
There's nothing wrong
Requiem
with
for a
sad.
Dream. Like, it's not a feel good movie.
Not
In
every
fact,
movie's supposed to be.
yeah, not every movie's supposed to be. But now, is this going to be a every year watch or an every other year watch? Probably not. But if somebody's looking for a very specific type of movie to watch, I could say, hey, consider The Elephant Man. It's pretty damn good.
I will say it's not always about how much I love it. It's also, is this well made? Is this, like, do I think they achieve what they set out to do? In that aspect, I think it's pretty flawless in a lot of ways. I did not love this movie. I think that it works in being sad, and it is a pretty miserable story. And the real life story is miserable. I accept that that's sometimes how stories are. I think that for me, I couldn't help it. It felt a little slow. And I did struggle with that a little bit. The other part of it is that it is miserable. And I know that the real story is miserable. Also, you're not doing the real story. And like, not saying that they should change the outcome of it, but I couldn't help but notice things like, I get that he is the character, Merrick's character is like doing the sideshow thing because he is having to, this is the way he survives. And in real life is the way that he survived. I don't feel like the movie ever really gets that across very well. I feel like it's like he was helpless and he had no other choice. And but almost like it was thrust upon him.
They mentioned that he had joined to escape the workhouses, don't they? In the movie? And the workhouse, granted, you have to understand the context, I guess, of Victorian London to an extent, but the option to be in a freak show was a better option for him than to be in the workhouses where he likely would have died.
Yeah. Which is, in real, the real story of Merrick is that he chooses that option because it is the best option for him financially and all of that stuff. I can't help but feel like they still put it upon like that Anthony Hopkins character, like this guy would have never found humanity if not for Anthony Hopkins, like Treves, like saving him and teaching him how to be a real human and like all of this stuff. I feel like that takes away a little bit from like, this guy is a real human and he's perfectly capable of being a real human. He knows what that is. Yeah, he's suffering from a lot of other people, but it's like, I don't know. I felt like it took away some. I can't help but thinking if you are a physically handicapped person watching this movie, that I bet you there are some that would be like, wow, you really made us seem incapable.
Well, I do think that I think the movie makes a point of pointing that out, that he is a highly intelligent person, that he was always a highly intelligent person. People were just assuming that he wasn't. And the whole thing where he quotes the 23rd Psalm, where they're like, how did you know that? Like Frederick Treves is surprised because he assumed that he was an imbecile. He even says that at some point in the film where he's like, I hope he is an imbecile. So that he doesn't understand the suffering that he's going through, but it turns out he's not. They were just making the assumption, and the movie does sort of chastise them for that, I think. And the movie even questions whether or not Treves himself is exploiting him in the same way that Mr. Bites was in the freak show. Like the movie doesn't ignore those points.
I do agree that they tried to. I think even some of the reviews I read, or somebody needs a nap extra section, like had a problem with him. And I was like, well, I think the movie does address that maybe he is a problem too.
Yeah. And not only that, but it makes Mr. Bites, who is a villain, it does seem to care about him, at least to an extent, about more so than just as a revenue stream, when he comes back for him, which I think was part of the input from the actor, the movie does gloss over certain things like that 23rd Psalm scene. Like John Merrick didn't just start talking because he practiced a couple of lines. He had to have surgery on his jaw to be able to physically speak in real life because he wasn't able to open his mouth enough to actually be understood. But sometimes things like that are changed just for levity, for the sake of, or the film not going on for too long, and just to move things along. Maybe that was in the original script that was written that was 200 pages long, and they had to shorten it to make it not a 4-hour movie, right?
Yeah. One of the reviews said something, I can't remember exactly what it was. They called it like sympathy porn or something like that. And I was like, man, I do kind of see that aspect of it. Like I can understand why someone would think that about that. It feels like, oh, let's just really try to like get some sympathy and to pull your tears out. I'm not gonna
It's tug tears.
Tug your tears out.
Yeah, tug out.
And I say all that to say I'm not like trying to bash the movie like I didn't like it. I think it is a very good movie. And I think that it does exactly what it wants to do. I just think that I don't think it's perfect. I think that there are some mild issues I have with it.
So after, we watched Eraserhead last week, and we watched all the short films, which are all really weird and surreal and bizarre. So how do you feel like going from Eraserhead to this? How do you feel about Lynch's sensibility as a filmmaker now that he's shown that he can direct something more quote unquote straightforward, more conventional, I guess, like The Elephant Man? How do you feel about him going forward? Like, that he can kind of do both. Like he can do weird and surreal and bizarre, but he can also do something like that immediately gained 8 Academy Award nominations, something that's very mainstream and was a hit. So how do you feel like going forward? What do you expect now? Especially for like you, Todd, who hasn't seen any of these. I know Gary at least has seen Mulholland Drive, which is bizarre.
I was going to say, just for me, I think that I just have the benefit of hindsight or whatever,
Right.
Like I'm like, oh, I know what Lynch is. And we're looking back on his career now. And it's like, I can't help but watch something like this. And I'm like, well, you proved you're competent. And
so because he could have gone in this direction, right? Like he could have gone and he probably had lots of offers to do some more stuff like this. And he could have taken his career in this direction. But of course, we know that Lynch is the guy who has to kind of follow his muse.
And so that's exactly what my thought was, is that if he had decided he wasn't that guy and he decided to do this, would we be talking about him in the
Probably
same way
not,
now?
Honestly.
Because I don't know that I could tell you what would stand out about him necessarily.
Right.
It would just be like, wow, this is Spielberg over here or something.
And then Eraserhead would feel like a weird outlier. Yeah. That was like, oh, this guy started off making this weirdo shit. Then he started making prestige dramas for the rest of his career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eraserhead would be a roulette episode as opposed to us covering.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Instead of the beginning of a very, interesting career.
Yeah.
Anytime I watch this movie, and I've seen this movie a handful of times at this point, I can't help but look for its like Lynchian qualities, because when you have a director who is as singular as Lynch and who, as I noted in our last episode, he has all these kind of repeating visual motifs throughout his filmography. It's hard not to want to like spot those, like spot the David Lynch thing, the things that you're used to seeing in his other films.
Right.
And that's even when he's doing something as relatively straightforward as The Elephant Man. Like you can't help but like look for those things. Like I know this is a David Lynch movie, and I know David Lynch movies really well, so I want to look for those things that I would expect from a David Lynch movie. It becomes kind of a game. That's what I've done in the past, and those things are there. Those things that kind of get beneath your skin. Those weird, you've got the opening and closing sequences, which are the most Lynchian things in the whole film by far. Plus, I think the way that he shoots the ballet, I think the ballet itself is very otherworldly and weird. The way that not their reactions in the in the audience, but the actual ballet itself feels very Lynchian to me. And then, of course, there's Alan Splett's sound design, which utilizes the sounds of Victorian England during, I guess this was like the Industrial Revolution, but he uses these sounds to create a world that's not unlike the one in Eraserhead.
Did we talk about? I don't think we did, but just him going to the freak show. I remember just the opening of him walking to the freak show felt like Eraserhead.
It felt like he's in the city from Eraserhead.
Yeah.
Just, a century earlier. Same thing when they visit Belgium to that other circus, and John Merrick's journey back, like that all feels very Eraserhead like. You've got, because it was the Industrial Revolution, you've got steam everywhere, you've got gas lights everywhere, so you've got this sort of, the combination of these sounds and Freddie Francis's cinematography that recreates London as this sort of Gotham by gaslight vision of the world that Henry Spencer lives in Eraserhead, right? Mm-hmm. So
nice pull, nice comic book pull. By the way,
it's one of my favorite Elseworld stories.
It's a good one.
But The Elephant Man is a movie that, just by the nature of the story that it's telling, is going to be a sentimental film. It is a bit of an outlier, I think, in Lynch's filmography, but only on a surface level, because as I mentioned in Eraserhead, I do think that all, or at least most, of Lynch's films have a human element to them to varying degrees. And I do think that he's kind of a humanist by heart. I think that anyone who reads or watches or listens to interviews with David Lynch would agree with that, probably, because he seems like a very sweet, very nice, like, person who genuinely has a good heart, I mean, granted, I don't know David Lynch, but this is just based on everything that I've read, and the guy loves doing an interview, so there's a lot of them out there, but I think the difference with The Elephant Man is that this is one of the few instances where David Lynch is wearing that humanist heart on his sleeve. He doesn't do that a whole lot. It's there a lot, but it's not always like right there on his sleeve like it is in this movie, because David Lynch movies often feature a lot of monsters, but they're human monsters. I mean, you've got Frank Booth in Blue Velvet, Bobby Peru in Wild at Heart, the Mystery Man in Lost Highway, the thing behind the dumpster in Mulholland Drive. But with The Elephant Man, Lynch has given us a monster movie where it's actually the monster who's the one who's afraid. The one that everyone sees as a monster is actually the heart of the story. And unlike all these other monsters who kind of make the choice to be monstrous, John Merrick just had the unfortunate luck of being born differently. And that makes him a little bit of an outsider, not unlike Lynch himself. So you can see where Lynch's attraction to the material comes from. Because, Lynch has always had this weird quality. We talked about this a lot during Eraserhead, where he's popular despite the fact that he is kind of a fucking weirdo. Like, he's a strange dude, right? Yeah. His eccentricities draw people to him while also pushing some other people away. I mean, the man has been married 4 times, right? So it doesn't always work out with every relationship. But it is hard not to watch The Elephant Man and see just a little bit of autobiography in Lynch's portrayal of Merrick, because Merrick is, he is portrayed as a bit of an artist, like with the little church that he creates, which Merrick did in real life.
Yeah.
Like that was not made up for the movie. That's something that Joseph Merrick did. But Merrick is sort of the ultimate tortured artist, right? His story takes him from a place of fear and revulsion to acceptance and respect, not unlike the road that Lynch himself took, coming from weirdo outsider art like The Grandmother and Eraserhead to literally receiving an Academy Award nomination for his next film, right? He's this outcast and weirdo that everyone thought was an oddball like Merrick, and then was welcomed into high society once that society realized that he wasn't just a weirdo, but he was a weirdo with an artistic soul. So with The Elephant Man, David Lynch was embraced by the Hollywood community, because here was this guy who seemingly came out of nowhere, who'd only made one movie that, frankly, like most people in Hollywood probably hadn't actually seen. And in his first studio picture, he got a whopping 8 Oscar nominations. Like, that's sort of insane, right? Yeah. Even without winning any of those, that is a hell of an achievement. And it should be no surprise that The Elephant Man forever changed David Lynch's career and his personal life, for that matter, because not long after the film's release, Mary Fisk became pregnant again. And this time it was sort of planned. Like David Lynch had said, hey, once I make, I think he said like $70,000 a year, we can have a baby. So at this point, like he was making well above that because of The Elephant Man. So now he could afford to buy a house where he could raise a family. So the two moved out of the small bungalow where they'd been renting since the Eraserhead days, and they bought a modest but nice house in the valley there in Southern California. But he wouldn't stay in that house for very long. Like he loved it there, but his family was growing and his career was growing, and he was about to make a lot more money, right? So with the success and accolades that came his way in the wake of The Elephant Man, Lynch he'd received quite a few big money offers from some of the most successful names in Hollywood. And one of those names, and actually the one that came closest to signing Lynch on to direct his third feature, was none other than George Lucas, who tapped Lynch to direct the third Star Wars film, Return of the Jedi, which sounds insane, right?
Yeah.
That sounds like David Lynch, Return of the Jedi. I mean, Lucas was in kind of a weird spot at the time. I'm not going to get into the whole history of Star Wars here. That's for another series down the line, I'm sure. But Star Wars had obviously been an unprecedented success. I don't need to go into its history for our listeners to know that. But on the second film in the franchise, The Empire Strikes Back, Lucas decided to step out of the director's chair. He had directed the first film, but for the second one, he wanted to take on let's say, a heavy-handed executive producer's role, with veteran journeyman director Irvin Kershner taking on the directing duties. And as we all know, Empire was also a huge success, both critically and commercially, but it left Lucas in a kind of a weird spot, right? He'd had a rift with his producer Gary Kurtz over budget overruns on Empire. So he ended up giving those producer duties to his Raiders of the Lost Ark executive producer Howard Kazajian for Jedi. So he has a new producer coming on. And also, there was a dispute over the credits, which forced Lucas to part ways with the Directors Guild of America. He was no longer in the Directors Guild, which was likely to cause some issues when it came time to find another director for Return of the Jedi, because then you're going to have union issues. So as they set out to find a director to helm Return of the Jedi, they were hoping they would find somebody who wasn't affiliated with the union, which led them to a lot of English and Australian directors, possible candidates for the role, although there were a few Americans mixed in as well. And the list of directors, and I only wrote down a partial list. This list was pretty long, but a list of the directors that were considered included names like Steven Spielberg, Alan Parker, Peter Weir, Richard Donner, Terry Gilliam, John Carpenter, David Cronenberg, Joe Dante, Jonathan Demme, and Tony Scott. All the
directors.
All the good ones.
All the good.
Richard Attenborough was on the list. Richard Lester, who did Hard Day's Night. Like, there was all kinds of people on this list.
Wow.
But the two that were at the top of the list were two that had been personally recommended by Lucas, and they were William Fraker, who I'm not super familiar with his directorial output. I know he was the cinematographer on Bullet. That's all I really know about William Fraker. And the other one was David Lynch. Now, Richard Marquand later threw his hat into the role and really campaigned to get it, which, as we know, he eventually did. But at the time, William Fraker and David Lynch were kind of like Lucas's picks. So Kazajian met with Lynch. They called David Lynch. They set up a meeting. They met in November of 1980, which is just like a month after Elephant Man came out. So before the Academy Award nominations are even out, just based on the strength and the reviews of The Elephant Man. So from the word go, though, Lynch kind of had concerns about taking on a project like Star Wars. He was worried that it would swallow him up and kind of limit his creative input on it. And those are valid concerns, I think.
Yeah.
So after a list of a dozen or so potential candidates was whittled down to about 3 or 4, Lynch was still there on the short list, and Lucas really wanted him for this, right? So they decided that these last 3 or 4 people, Lucas was going to go and watch all of their movies, and then invite them up to Northern California, the ranch, to hang out for a day, basically, because he was going to have to work together side by side with whoever he hired for the next 2 years of his life.
Yeah.
So he wanted to make sure he got along with them as well. So he invited David Lynch to come up to Northern California to spend the day with him, and to hear Lynch describe this whole experience.
I was asked by George to come up to see him and talk to him about directing, which would be the third Star Wars. And I had next door to zero interest. But I always admired George. You know, George is a guy that does what he loves, and I do what I love. The difference is what George loves makes hundreds of billions of dollars. So I thought I should go up and at least visit with him. And it was incredible. I had to go to this building in LA first and get a special credit card, and I had to get special keys, and a letter came and a map. And then I went into the airport, and I flew up, and then they had a rental car all ready for me, and this keys, and you know, everything was set, and I was to drive to this place. And I came into an office, and there was George. And he talked with me for a little bit, and then he said, I want to show you something. Now, right about in this time, I started getting a little bit of a headache. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. So he took me upstairs, and he showed me these things called Wookiees. And now this headache is getting stronger. And he showed me many animals and different things. Then he took me for a ride in his Ferrari for a lunch. And George is kind of short, so his seat was way back, and he was almost laying down in the car. We were flying through this little town up in Northern California. We went to a restaurant. Not that I don't like salad, but that's all they had was salad. Then I got a really, almost like a migraine headache.
It was like he was having a physical reaction to the idea of taking on this movie, one that was somebody else's vision and not his own.
Mm.
To hear him describe it, he says, like, I had zero to no, next to zero interest,
Yeah.
you know, like in doing this, but like his agent and lawyer had like,
Well, it's millions of dollars that he would have made. Yeah, millions of dollars on the table. And after the meeting, like he was on his way home, and he says that he couldn't even wait to get home. He had to stop at a phone booth to call his agent because he had to be like and he told his agent, he said, there is no way that I can do this film. He's like, I can't do it. Please don't make me do it. Like, and his agent's like, it's fine, David. You don't have to do the movie. It's fine. And he had to call his lawyer up and tell him the same thing, which of course his agent and his lawyer were probably poised to make a percentage of I think it was a $3 million payday that he would have gotten for that.
Oof.
yeah, he said his lawyer was like, it's fine, but you just passed up like millions
of dollars, right?
They're both like, but if you don't want to do it, let's just like, I don't want to do it. I don't care.
Now, that's David Lynch's version of the story, which is a fun little anecdote, but Lucas and Kazajian's versions of the story, they are a bit different. Kazajian writes about it in his autobiography. He says that as late as February of 1981, Lynch's agent was calling Lucasfilm to ask if they were still interested in hiring him. And at the end of March, Lynch was added to their list of candidates, although Kazajian did note that he was already concerned at that point because he felt that Lynch wanted to, quote, make a statement. He understands who this guy is as a filmmaker, right? Kazajian had also made the recommendation that Lucasfilm as a whole, as a company, pull out of the Directors Guild. But because Lynch was a member of the DGA, if he had been hired by the company that was no longer, like, that was not affiliated with the DGA at all, he would have been heavily scrutinized by both the Guild and by his peers and other directors, in Hollywood. It's possible that he may have been blacklisted if he had been hired on Jedi.
Wow.
Yeah. So in May of 1981, another one of the candidates, I mentioned him earlier, Richard Marquand, he called Lucas and wanted to pitch himself again. He was being really like, don't forget about me. Let me come and talk to you again. I really want this job. And Lucas told him at that point that it was down to him and one other guy. And that one other guy, inexplicably, was still David Lynch. Lucas really wanted David Lynch for this. And then the next day, Lucas called Kazajian and said, we're going with David. I want David Lynch. We're down, like, final answer. So they called David Lynch, who was reportedly thrilled to receive the offer, but he declined it a day or two later. His reasoning, according to his statement to the Associated Press, when he talked to them about it, was that Lucas had already designed 3/4 of the film. Lynch also told Kazajian that he didn't want to do it, or at least partially because he didn't want to work with John Williams. Nothing against John Williams. He just wanted to do his own thing and work with his own people. And he didn't want to work with Ben Burtt, who was like Lucas's guy. Like that was his sound guy. That's the guy who created the sound of the lightsaber. You know, like Ben Burtt is a legend. But of course, David Lynch wanted to work with Alan Splett. So it would have sounded very different. It would have looked very different. In the end, George Lucas, in looking back at it in hindsight, said that he might have gone a bridge too far with pursuing David Lynch. It probably would not have worked out very well. And he's right. I think while I would love the curiosity makes me want to know what a David Lynch Return of the Jedi would have actually looked like. I'm kind of glad that didn't happen, both for David Lynch's career and for the Star Wars franchise. Same with David Cronenberg. I mean, David Cronenberg doing Return of the Jedi would have been like, what the fuck? Like, what? Like, like that wouldn't have made any sense to me. But not long after he turned down Star Wars, like within a few weeks, Lynch's next film was being announced in the industry trade. So people are opening up Variety and Hollywood Reporter and seeing the next David Lynch film is already being announced. So obviously he had been being courted by another party while he was in discussion with Lucas. He had people fighting over him, right? In this case, that other party was legendary and legendarily difficult producer Dino De Laurentiis, who we have talked about on in the past on the show. I think most extensively probably on our Sam Raimi series because he was involved in Army of Darkness, of course. But Dino De Laurentiis hired Lynch for what would ultimately be a doomed adaptation of Frank Herbert's epic science fiction novel Dune. And that, of course, is the story that we're going to be exploring in part 4 of our series on the films of David Lynch. So join us next time as we take a deep dive into the creation of David Lynch's Dune. It is quite the story. Well, anyway, that's it for this episode, guys. We're moving on. We're over halfway through our David Lynch series already. And
we've only watched 2 movies. How are we over halfway through?
Well, we got 3 episodes. We got Dune, Blue Velvet, Wild at Heart.
And we've done 3 episodes.
We've done 3 episodes, 2 movies. That's half.
Yeah, you said over half.
Well, this episode's done, so we're
over.
Now we're over half.
Yeah.
I get you. Okay, I think I'm picking it up.
And I've already started working on the Dune notes, so I am over half. Anyway, where can you fellas be found on the internet?
This is Gary Horn on everything.
Look, fuckstick, I'm incredibly busy. My show, Computer Resume Podcast, is available. That's another Les Grossman quote. Thank you. My show, Computer Resume Podcast, is available wherever you get your podcasts. We're covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order. You can find us at Computer Resume on Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads. We're on Threads now. TikTok, Venmo, and Patreon. And I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, X, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
You can find me at Justin_Bishop on most of the things that Todd just mentioned, except for D&D Beyond. And you can find the show at Cinema_Shock. You can find us on X, Instagram, and of course, Letterboxd. Also, cinemashock.net, where you can find all of our episodes. You can find links to our merch. Like we mentioned earlier, we've got lots of new merch that you can buy. And you can also join Cinema Shock Plus right there from our website. And that's all I got for today.
Nice.
Until next time.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the
Diet Coke!
Oh, you're doing the Les Grossman thing.
Yeah.
Was there something else I was supposed to mention at the end of this episode? Oh, shit. There is. We've got a live event coming up.
Ooh.
August 20th. We mentioned it on the last episode. I think there's also a commercial for it at the beginning of this one. But in case you forgot, August 20th, Greenville, South Carolina, the Coffee Underground. We are teaming up again with Gut Punch Cinema for another cult class. That's our monthly screening series of classic cult films. Yay. We're doing a back to school theme for August because that's when school goes back, at least here in South Carolina. That's when school goes back. So we are doing the cult classic Alan Arkish, Roger Corman, a little bit of Joe Dante sprinkled in there production, Rock and Roll High School.
Yay.
I'm excited about it because I love that movie so much. So I'm really excited to watch it with a crowd. Head to cinemashock.net, click on events, and you can find a link to buy tickets there. Tickets are $12 if you buy them at the door, but if you buy them ahead of time, you'll save a couple of bucks. And now, for real, we're done with the episode.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.